My family owes you a future, Annie, the white billionaire said, standing in the diner where everyone had just laughed at her mother's name. Annie Carter tightened the strap of her old backpack on her shoulder. She stared at the man in front of her. What did you just say? The man looked at her. I said, my family owes you a future. She laughed. If this is a joke, you picked the wrong night. Are you Annie Carter? Her eyes changed at once. Yes, sir. My name is Richard Hawthorne. Everybody in Ashford knew the Hawthorne name. It was written on hospital plaques, scholarship banners, charity galas, and buildings. I know who you are, Annie said. Everybody around here knows who you are. Richard held her gaze. So what you just said is pretty funny, she went on, her voice sharpening. If you said we owed you, that might make more sense. I'm not confused, Richard cut in, calm but firm. I have something I need to tell you. Annie looked away, clearly irritated. I don't have time for your people's jokes. The diner's closed. If you came to hand out charity, try somewhere else. I didn't come here for charity. Then what did you come here for? A man like you doesn't stand outside a diner near 10 o'clock at night just to talk to a girl like me. Richard lowered his eyes slightly. I came because of my father. Annie did not answer right away. Behind them, Marvin Pike had been laughing into his coffee, telling anyone who would listen that Mara Carter had probably died with secrets in her pocket. Your mama always had a funny way around rich folks, Marvin had said from his stool at the counter. Women like that don't get near families like the Hawthorns unless there's money, trouble, or both. A few customers had laughed. Annie had stood there with a coffee pot in her hand and swallowed every word. She needed the tips. She needed the job. So she had said nothing. She turned back to Richard. My mother is dead, she said. So whatever story you think you have, take it somewhere else. Richard's face tightened. I know she passed 3 months ago. I'm sorry. Don't be sorry like you knew her. I didn't know her the way I should have. Annie's hand closed around her backpack strap until her knuckles showed. That doesn't mean anything. No, he said. Not yet. Derek Cole came out from behind the register with a dish towel over one shoulder. Annie, Derek said quietly. Maybe you should step into the back. She did not look at him. My shift is over. Still maybe. Now you want to manage the room. Derek's mouth shut. Richard reached inside his coat slowly and took out an old cream-colored envelope. The paper had softened at the corners. It did not look like business. He placed it on the counter. No joke, he said. My father wrote your mother's name before he died, and my family hid it. Annie did not touch the envelope. Marvin Pike sighed. Well, I'll be. Mara's girl caught herself a Hawthorne after all. Richard turned toward him. Mr. Pike, is it? Marvin blinked. You know me? No. But I know the type of man who waits until a woman is buried before he feels safe using her name. Marvin looked embarrassed. Now hold on. I didn't mean nothing by it. That is usually what people say when they meant just enough. Annie should have felt offended. Instead, anger rose in her. She did not need Richard Hawthorne arriving to protect a mother he had never watched. Annie picked up the envelope at last. On the front, in faded handwriting, were the words, for Mara Carter, and for the daughter I failed before I ever met her. My mother didn't know your father, she said. Richard answered softly. She knew him on the worst night of his life. My mother worked at Street Agnes. Then she worked here. Then she cleaned offices after midnight. She didn't have time for billionaires. I know, he said. That is part of the debt. Don't use that word with me unless you know what it means, Annie said. Richard nodded once. Fair enough. The woman behind him stepped forward. Mr. Hawthorne, your sister wanted. No, Richard said, without looking back. Not here. Annie caught it. Your sister? She is Eleanor Hawthorne. What does she want? Annie asked. Richard looked at the envelope in her hand. She wants this handled quietly. Annie let out another dry laugh. Quietly. That's always what people with money want after they've done something loud enough to ruin somebody else's life. Richard did not deny it. My father died 6 weeks ago, he said. Before he died, he told me there was a woman named Mara Carter who saved his life and mine. He said our family made her a promise. Then we buried that promise because it was easier to let a poor black woman be doubted than to let a rich family be ashamed. Annie looked around the diner. My mother would have told me, Annie said. Richard's voice softened. Maybe she was trying to protect you. She slid the envelope halfway back toward him. I'm not signing anything. I'm not asking you to. I'm not interested in hush money, charity, or anything that makes my mother's pain look like something your family can buy off. Good, Richard said. because charity would be too small for what my family owes. Annie went still. Derek cleared his throat. Annie, if you're leaving, I need your apron. She untied it without looking at him and tossed it onto the counter. There, try not to let it offend anybody. Annie tucked the envelope inside her coat, close to her ribs. It felt too thin to hold anything that could matter, but somehow it weighed more than the backpack cutting into her shoulder. She turned to Richard. If this is a trick, Mr. Hawthorne, I don't just walk away. I make noise. I believe you. She walked out through the side door into the cold evening. Annie did not open the letter in the car. She sat behind the wheel with both hands on it. She did not trust Richard Hawthorne. She did not believe in rich men bringing futures to girls like her. She did not know why her mother had kept such a secret, or what kind of promise could arrive too late to help the woman who deserved it. Whatever Mara Carter had carried in silence, it had finally found the daughter she left behind. My family owes you a future. She almost laughed again, but the sound would have had nowhere to go. Ashford after 10 o'clock looked like a town that had learned to turn its lights off early. The pharmacy sign flickered. Annie drove carefully, because the Ford pulled left when the road dipped and she could not afford a tire, a tow, or one more problem with a receipt attached. The second-floor window of their apartment glowed yellow. Noah was still awake. Annie got out, pulled her backpack over one shoulder, and climbed the outside stairs as quietly as she could. At the landing, Mrs. Alvarez from 2B opened her door 2 inches. Chain still on. That you, Annie? Yes, ma'am. You ate? I'm fine. Mrs. Alvarez looked her. I made rice and beans. There's a container by your door. Annie looked down. Her throat tightened before she could stop it. Thank you, ma'am. I'll bring the container back tomorrow. No rush. Tell that brother of yours not to sleep with his socks off. These walls don't hold heat worth nothing. I will. Thank you. Then she unlocked her own door. Noah was at the kitchen table with a pencil in his hand and a math worksheet under his elbow. The little lamp above the stove was the only light on. Annie kept it that way to save power. You're late, he said. You're awake. I was doing fractions. You hate fractions. I thought maybe they changed. She smiled despite herself and set the rice and beans on the counter. They didn't. Noah's eyes went to the container. Mrs. Alvarez? Yes. She makes it spicy. She makes it free. We just say thank you and drink water. He grinned, then coughed into his sleeve. She crossed the kitchen before he could hide the sound. Where's your inhaler? In my room. Noah. He looked down. In my backpack. Why? I didn't need it. That wasn't the question. He shrugged one shoulder. Too small to be carrying that much caution. I didn't want to lose it at school. You use it today? Only once. How many is once? He hesitated. Noah. Twice. But the second time was little. Annie put the inhaler on the table. Breathing is not something we bargain with. I know. Do you? He nodded, then glanced at her coat. Why are you still wearing that? Annie looked down. She had not taken it off because the envelope was inside. Because once she took it out, the night would become real. I forgot. Since Mara died, Noah had started watching Annie's face before asking for anything. Bad shift? People talk too much. About Mama? Annie paused. Noah's pencil stopped moving. They did, didn't they? She took off her coat and hung it on the back of a chair, careful to keep the envelope hidden in the inside pocket. People who don't know much usually talk the loudest. Mr. Pike? Eat your rice. That means yes. It means eat your rice. Noah pushed a spoonful around his plate. Are we going to have to move? Annie kept chewing, though the food had turned heavy in her mouth. Why would you ask that? I saw the paper on the fridge. We're not moving tonight, she said. That's not what I asked. I'm working on it, she said. Noah nodded like he had expected no more than that. I can stop getting school lunch if it costs money. It doesn't. I can stop drinking milk there. Noah, I'm just saying, you are 9. Your job is school, breathing, and not growing out of shoes too fast. He looked at his socked feet, his toes pressed against the fabric. I can't control the shoe thing. That made her laugh for real, just once. He smiled, proud of himself. After dinner, Annie made him use the inhaler before bed. He protested out of habit, then did it. You working tomorrow? He asked. Morning laundry, afternoon diner. I thought Mr. Cole said you could have Saturday off. Mr. Cole says a lot of things. Noah rolled onto his side. When you go to nursing school, will you still work at the diner? The question landed before she could prepare for it. Her acceptance packet was in the kitchen drawer under the bills. Allegheny County Community College. Practical nursing program. Orientation in 2 weeks. Deposit due Friday. I don't know yet, she said. But you got in. I got in. Mama said getting in means the door opened. Annie sat on the edge of his bed, the mattress dipped under her weight. Sometimes doors open and still cost money to walk through. Noah thought about that. If you don't go, is it because of me? She turned to him sharply. No. You always say no fast when it's a little yes. Annie closed her eyes for a second. Noah's voice got smaller. If I wasn't sick, you could go. Listen to me. She leaned closer. You are not the reason I stopped dreaming. You're the reason I keep trying. He looked at her, wanting to believe it because he loved her, not because the world had proven it true. Promise. I promise. She kissed his forehead. It was warm, but not fever warm. At the door, he said, Annie? Yeah? Did something happen tonight? For a second, she'd tell him everything. Richard Hawthorne. The diner. The envelope. The sentence that made no sense. My family owes you a future. But Noah had already carried enough of the adult world for one night. His eyes moved to her coat on the chair. So what do you think is in that letter? He asked. Do you think he really owes us something? Maybe, Annie said. I need to understand it first. She turned back to him and softened her voice. Now you need to sleep. These things are not something you should be worrying about too much. I worry anyway. I know, but tonight, let me do it. Noah watched her a moment, then nodded. That was the thing about him. He accepted partial truth when full truth looked too heavy. Even if accepting it made him look older than a child should. When he was asleep, Annie went back to the kitchen. She picked up the photograph from the refrigerator, the one of Mara, in her Street Agnes badge, standing outside the hospital, with the sun in her eyes. Hope. That hurt worse. She set the photo on the table beside 2 envelopes, one from a college she might not attend, one from a dead rich man claiming her mother had saved his life. Annie sat down in the kitchen chair, still in her diner uniform, and pressed both hands over her face. She had spent 3 months grieving a mother she thought she understood. Now, in one night, the world had handed her a door, a warning, and a question. What else had Mara Carter been forced to carry alone? If Annie's words touched your heart, please give this video a like for her and for every person who keeps fighting for their family in silence. Tell us in the comments where you are watching from, because someone near you may be listening to Annie and Noah's story too. And don't forget to subscribe for more emotional and inspiring stories like this. Annie did not sleep much. She lay on the couch under the thin brown blanket, listening to Noah's breathing from the bedroom and the building settling around them. Every sound had its own meaning in Maple Row. Pipes knocking meant the heat was trying. Footsteps overhead meant Mr. Gaines had come home from the late shift. A cough through the wall meant Mrs. Alvarez's husband was up again. But the sound that kept Annie awake was not in the apartment. It was paper, an old envelope on the kitchen table, waiting without making a sound. By 6 in the morning, she had given up pretending. She washed her face in cold water, braided her hair back, and put on the cleanest shirt she had. Not her diner uniform, not today. If Richard Hawthorne wanted to talk about her mother, Annie was not going to meet him smelling like fryer oil. Noah found her at the stove, heating oatmeal with more water than milk. You're dressed different, he said. I have to go somewhere before work. With him? Annie stirred the pot. Maybe. You said I shouldn't worry. I said too much. There's a difference. He slid into the chair, still half asleep. Are you going to open it? She knew he meant the envelope. Not here. Why? Because this apartment had already held enough bad news. Because if the letter said something ugly, she did not want Noah's cereal bowl sitting beside it. Because if it said something true, she did not know what it might do to the mother they had left. I need to hear what he has to say first, Annie said. Noah accepted that, but not happily. He ate the oatmeal without complaining, though both of them knew it needed sugar. Before he left for school, Annie checked his inhaler, tucked it into the front pocket of his backpack, and made him look at her. You use it if you need it, not if it feels convenient. If you need it. Yes, ma'am. Don't yes, ma'am me if you're planning to be hard-headed. He gave her the small smile he used when he wanted her to stop being scared. I'll use it. Mrs. Alvarez agreed to watch for him after school if Annie's shift ran late. Annie thanked her twice, then took the envelope, her college packet, and the photograph of Mara in her Street Agnes badge. She did not know why she brought the photo. Maybe she needed proof that her mother had been real before the Hawthorns turned her into evidence. Richard had suggested his office. Annie refused. He suggested the foundation building. She almost hung up. In the end, they agreed on the Ashford Public Library at 9:30, in the small meeting room near the back where the quilting club met on Thursdays and retired men came to get help printing tax forms. The library smelled like old carpet and winter coats. A woman at the front desk looked at Annie, then at Richard Hawthorne waiting near the meeting room door, and tried not to look surprised. Richard stood when Annie approached. He was alone this time. No woman with a folder. No man in a suit. "Thank you for coming," he said. "I came for my mother. Don't confuse it." "I won't." The room had a square table, 6 chairs, a whiteboard stained with old marker, and a window looking out at the parking lot. Annie chose the chair closest to the door. Richard noticed but did not comment. She placed the envelope on the table between them. "You open it," she said. Richard shook his head. "It was written to your mother. And to you. She's not here." "No," he said. "She isn't." The quiet after that had weight. Annie hated him a little for letting it sit there instead of filling it with rich man talk. She picked up the envelope and slid one finger under the flap. The glue had given up years ago. Inside were 3 folded pages and a smaller photograph, face down. Annie unfolded the letter carefully. The handwriting was the same as the front, thin and slanted, but steady. "Dear Mara, if this letter reaches you, then I have either found the courage to send it or death has done what cowardice would not." Annie stopped. Her eyes moved to Richard. He looked down at his hands. She kept reading. "There are debts a man can pay with money, and there are debts that money only insults. What I owe you began on Blackwater Road, the night the rain froze before it hit the ground and my son was 7 years old in the back seat of a car that should never have been on that road." Annie felt the room pull inward. Richard's voice was quiet. "I was 7. I don't remember all of it. I remember the smell. Something sharp, like bleach and metal. I remember coughing until I couldn't cry." Annie did not ask him to continue. The letter did. The tanker had gone over near the bend. We were told later the cargo was within legal limits. That was not true. I knew enough that night to understand what my company would try to hide by morning. I also knew my boy was breathing because you dragged him from the car before I could unbuckle myself. Annie's fingers tightened around the paper. "My boy." She looked at Richard, trying to imagine him small, coughing, helpless. And her mother younger than Annie was now, or maybe not much older. Standing in freezing rain with danger in the air. Richard said, "Your mother was coming off a night shift at Street Agnes. She stopped when other cars kept going." Annie went back to the letter. "You wrapped your scarf around Richard's mouth and told him to breathe through it. You came back for me when the fumes were already moving low across the road. I remember your hands on my coat. I remember you calling me sir while saving my life, which has shamed me more with every passing year." Annie swallowed. Her mother had always called strangers sir and ma'am, even when they did not deserve it. Especially then, maybe, because Mara believed manners belonged to the person giving them, not the one receiving them. The next lines were harder to read. "You saw what you were not meant to see." The placard on the tanker. The driver's log. The second manifest. "You understood enough to know the official story would be a lie before anyone had written it down. I asked you to wait. I asked you to trust me. I told you I would make it right after I protected the workers, the company, my son." Annie's jaw tightened. "That sounds convenient," she said. Richard nodded. It was. She looked at him. He did not defend his father. She continued, "You trusted me, and that trust became the first thing my family stole from you." The sentence hit so cleanly that Annie had to stop reading. Outside the meeting room, a child laughed somewhere in the library. Then a woman hushed him. Life kept moving in ordinary ways while Annie sat with a dead man confessing that her mother's life had been bent on purpose. Richard reached into his coat and placed a folder on the table, but did not open it. "There's more," he said. "Records. Some are incomplete. Some were altered, but enough lines up with what he wrote." Annie ignored the folder for now. "Why didn't he fix it?" Richard took a breath. "I don't know the whole answer. 3. My Aunt Eleanor and the company attorneys got involved by morning. They said there would be panic. Lawsuits. Men losing jobs. Pension funds collapsing. They told my father the responsible thing was to control the story first and correct it later. Later never came. No." Annie heard her mother's voice in memory, tired and low over a sink full of dishes. Later is a word people use when they want you quiet today. She read on. I promised you protection. I promised your nursing program would be paid for. I promised that if you ever had a child, no child of yours would stand outside a door because money kept it closed. I signed papers to make that promise real. Those papers were removed. I let myself believe I would recover them. I let years pass. That is not an excuse. It is the shape of my failure. Annie's eyes burned. Nursing program. Her mother had not failed out. Had not simply changed her mind. Had not been too tired to want more. Someone had promised her a door and then locked it from the other side. She pulled Mara's photograph from her bag and set it beside the letter. Street Agnes badge. Sun in her eyes. Hope Annie had not known how to name. She wanted to be a nurse, Annie said. Yes, Richard answered. You knew that before today? I learned it from my father's files. Files, she repeated. My mother had a life. Your family had files. Richard looked at the photograph. You're right. Annie hated that he kept being right in the only way that mattered, by admitting wrong. She turned to the last page. If Mara Walker's child ever stands at a door the world is trying to close, open it, not as charity, as debt. If that child is a daughter, tell her this. Her mother was not a liar, not a thief, not a woman looking for advantage. She was the bravest person on Blackwater Road, and I have lived too long with a name praised in public, while hers was doubted in private. Annie could not read the next line aloud. She did not realize she had been reading aloud until her voice stopped. Richard finished it softly, from memory. Find Annie Carter. Tell her my family owes her a future. Then do not ask her to be grateful for what should have been hers. The room blurred. Annie put the letter down before tears could fall on it. For 3 months, grief had been simple in its cruelty. Mara was gone. Annie missed her. Noah missed her. Bills remained. Work remained. That was pain she understood. But this was different. This reached backward and touched every exhausted night Mara had come home too tired to eat. Every job application that had never called back. Every time someone in Ashford looked at her mother like she had once done something shameful and never been forgiven for it. Annie pressed her palms to the table. My mother never told me any of this. Richard said. Maybe she thought silence would keep you safe. Everybody keeps saying that, because it might be true. Annie looked up. Safe from who? He did not answer fast enough. That was answer enough. She picked up the small photograph from the envelope and turned it over. It showed a road at night, headlights blurred by rain, emergency vehicles in the distance. Near the edge of the frame stood a woman in a hospital jacket, one hand raised as if warning someone back. The image was grainy, but Annie knew the posture. She had seen it all her life at crosswalks, in grocery aisles, at Noah's bedside. Mara Carter standing between danger and somebody else. Annie's voice came out low. What exactly did your family do to her after that night? Richard opened the folder then. Inside were copies of hospital notices, legal letters, old company memos, and one document with Mara's signature at the bottom. They made her sign a statement, he said. Then they used it against her. Annie stared at the signature. Her mother's handwriting. Real. Trapped on a page she had never seen. Richard continued, Careful now. There are gaps. I won't pretend otherwise. But after Blackwater Road, your mother lost her position at Street Agnes. Her nursing application disappeared. A note was placed in her employment file saying she had made an unreliable report during an industrial incident. Unreliable, Annie repeated. Yes. She saved your life. Yes. And they called her unreliable. Richard did not look away. Yes. Annie stood so fast the chair scraped the floor. She walked to the window and stared at the parking lot. At a minivan with a cracked windshield. At an old man loading library books into a cloth bag. Ordinary morning. Ordinary people. The world had no shame about continuing. Behind her, Richard said, I can help with your tuition immediately. Housing, too. Medical costs for your brother. My father set aside money. She turned. No. He stopped. You don't get to buy the easy part first. It isn't meant that way. I don't care how it's meant. My mother died with people thinking she was something she wasn't. If there's money, fine. If there are papers, fine. But before any of that, I want the story. All of it. Richard studied her, and this time she saw the thing beneath his calm. Fear. Not of her. Maybe not even of scandal. Fear of what his father had left for him to uncover. My sister will fight this, he said. Lydia. She has lawyers, board members, friends in places that still answer her calls. Annie picked up Mara's photograph and held it flat against her chest. "I have my mother's name," she said. Seems like she fought with less. For the first time that morning, Richard had no answer. Annie gathered the letter, the photo, and the copies he allowed her to take. At the door, she paused. "You said your father knew my mother on the worst night of his life." "Yes." She looked back at him. "Maybe it was the worst night of hers, too. Maybe your family just got to leave the road." Then she walked out of the meeting room and into the library's quiet, carrying the letter that had arrived years late and still managed to open a wound that had never healed right. Annie left the library with the papers tucked under her arm and the letter folded inside her coat. The morning had turned bright in that hard winter way, sunlight without warmth, the kind that showed every crack in the sidewalk and every salt stain on the road. She stood beside the Ford for a minute before getting in, because once she started the car, she would have to decide where to go. Work was the practical answer. The laundry on Mercer paid cash for early shifts when someone called out, and Annie had already missed enough hours that week. But the photograph of Mara on Blackwater Road sat on top of the folder, and every time Annie looked at it, the idea of folding strangers' sheets while her mother's name lay trapped in old paperwork felt impossible. She drove to the only person who might know how much of the story had been living just outside her reach. Mrs. Laverne Ellis lived in a small blue house 2 blocks behind Maple Row, the kind with plastic flowers in the porch planter and wind chimes that sounded tired but kept moving. Annie had known that porch all her life. As a little girl, she had sat on those steps eating peach slices from a paper plate while Mara and Mrs. Laverne talked in low voices through summer evenings. Back then, Annie thought grown women only talked about bills, church, weather, and children. Now she wondered how many conversations had stopped when she walked too close. Mrs. Laverne opened the door before Annie knocked twice. She was in a house dress and cardigan, gray hair pinned back, reading glasses hanging from a chain around her neck. She took one look at Annie's face and stepped aside. "Come in, child." Annie entered without pretending she was fine. The house smelled like cornbread, furniture polish, and the peppermint tea Mrs. Laverne drank for her stomach. On the wall by the hallway hung framed photographs: her late husband in an army uniform, her church choir in matching blue robes, a black and white picture of younger Laverne standing near a courthouse with a sign that said, "We want equal justice now." Annie had passed those pictures 100 times and never really looked at them. That morning, they seemed less like memories and more like warnings. Mrs. Laverne pointed to the kitchen table. "Sit." "I can't stay long." "You can sit short then." Annie sat. Mrs. Laverne set a mug of tea in front of her and a small plate with 2 pieces of cornbread. "Eat." "I'm not hungry." "I didn't ask what your feelings said." "Eat." Annie broke off a corner because refusing would take more strength than obeying. The cornbread was warm, a little sweet, and suddenly her eyes burned. She had not eaten breakfast. Mrs. Laverne watched her take 2 bites before speaking. "Now tell me what he gave you." Annie pulled out the letter, the photograph, and the copies Richard had allowed her to keep. She spread them across the table. The old woman did not touch anything at first. She looked down at Mara's name on the envelope, and something moved through her face that Annie had never seen there before. Not surprise. Recognition. "You knew," Annie said. Mrs. Laverne lowered herself into the chair across from her. "I knew there was a night. I didn't know all of it." "That's not an answer. It's the only honest one I have." Annie pushed the photograph forward. "That's Mama." Mrs. Laverne put on her glasses. Her hand went still over the picture. For a long moment, she said nothing. The kitchen clock ticked above the stove. "That jacket," she said finally. "Street Agnes. She used to wear it even after they let her go. Said it was too warm to throw out." "They didn't let her go," Annie said. "They pushed her out." Mrs. Laverne closed her eyes for a second. "So that part was true." "What part?" The old woman leaned back, but it was not from Annie. It was from the years. "After Blackwater Road, your mother came here close to dawn, hair wet, hands shaking. I thought she'd been in an accident. She wouldn't sit. Kept walking from that door to that window, saying she had to get to the hospital, had to make a statement, had to make sure a little boy was alive. Richard. I didn't know his name then." Annie gripped the mug. "Why didn't she tell me? You were a baby when most of the damage came due. Later, when you were old enough to ask, she had already learned what the truth cost." "She should have told me." "Yes," Mrs. Laverne said. Annie looked up, caught off guard. The old woman did not soften it. "She should have, and she loved you. Both can be true." That hurt because it gave Annie no clean place to put her anger. Mrs. Laverne picked up the copy of the employment notice from Street Agnes. Her mouth tightened as she read the line about unreliable reporting. They used those words on her? Annie nodded. Mrs. Laverne took off her glasses and set them down with care. Your mother used to sit right there where you're sitting. She'd come after interviews, trying to act like it didn't matter that another place turned her away. She'd say, maybe next week, Miss Laverne. Then she'd ask if I needed anything from the store. Like her own heart wasn't sitting cracked in her chest. Annie stared at the table. She wanted to be a nurse, she said. She did. Not just talked about it. Child, Mara had pamphlets, forms, schedules. She kept a little notebook with drug names in it. She'd practice saying them out loud while stirring soup. Your mama could turn a patient every 2 hours. Remember who needed ice chips, who needed prayer, who needed somebody to call them by their first name. She had the hands for nursing. Annie pressed her lips together. Mrs. Laverne continued, quieter. After they marked her file, doors started closing, not all at once. That would have been easier to fight. One hospital said they were full. One clinic said they'd call. One training program misplaced her application. Then folks around town started whispering that Mara had lied about something out on Blackwater Road. By the time people are whispering, they don't need proof. They just need permission. Annie thought of Marvin Pike, of his grin over the coffee cup. Who gave them permission? Mrs. Laverne looked at the papers. People with clean shoes and lawyers. Annie almost smiled, but it broke before it formed. Did Mama take money from them? No. You're sure? I'm sure of what she told me. What did she tell you? Mrs. Laverne folded her hands. They were lined and strong, the nails cut short. She said Thomas Hawthorne had promised to make things right. She said he was scared but not evil. Those were her words. I told her scared men with money can do more damage than evil men without it. She didn't like hearing that, because she trusted him. For a while, Annie swallowed. And then she stopped mentioning his name. She got pregnant with you not long after, and her whole world shrank down to rent, diapers, work, and keeping you warm. When you were born, I thought she might fight again. Some women get fierce after they have a child. Mara did get fierce, but not the way I expected. She didn't go after the Hawthorns. She went after survival. That's not enough. No, Mrs. Laverne said. It isn't. But when a woman is alone with a baby and a landlord wants rent, survival can look like the only room left in the house. The words settled between them. Annie reached for the letter. Thomas wrote that if I ever stood at a door the world was closing, they should open it. He wrote that like he was sorry. Sorry is a start. It's not a payment. No, it is not. It's not even close. No. Annie looked at her. Then why does everyone keep acting like I should be grateful? Mrs. Laverne's eyes sharpened. Who is everyone? Him. Maybe not in words, but he came with that face. Like he expected me to understand he was trying. Trying is what people do when they're late, and don't want to admit the bus left without them. Annie let out a breath that was almost a laugh. Mrs. Laverne tapped the letter with one finger. Listen to me. Don't let pride make you refuse what truth is trying to return. But don't let their guilt dress itself up as goodness either. Annie looked down. I don't know how to do both. You learn. Same way we learned everything else they didn't teach us. One hard morning at a time. The old woman got up slowly and went to the hallway closet. Annie heard boxes moving. The scrape of cardboard against wood. Mrs. Laverne came back carrying a small shoebox tied with twine. Your mama left this here years ago. Annie sat straighter. What is it? I never opened it. She said if anything happened and you came asking about the past, I should give it to you. I asked her what past. She said, the one that keeps charging interest. The box looked ordinary. A department store logo faded on the lid. Annie reached for it, then stopped. How long have you had this? Since Noah was a toddler. And you didn't tell me? Mrs. Laverne did not look away. Your mother asked me not to. I'm asking now. I know. Annie pulled the twine loose. Inside were a folded Street Agnes jacket, a hospital badge, a small notebook, and a sealed envelope with Annie's name written in Mara's hand. The sight of that handwriting nearly undid her. She touched the badge first. Mara Carter, patient care assistant. The plastic had yellowed at the edges. Mara's photo was small, her smile restrained, hopeful. Annie turned the badge over out of instinct. There was a scratch on the back. Not random. Words carved lightly into the plastic with something sharp. Someday, nurse. Annie's breath caught. Mrs. Laverne saw it and looked away, giving her privacy without leaving. Annie held the badge in both hands. For years, she had thought nursing was her dream because she wanted it. Now she understood it had been waiting before her, carried by a woman who never got to wear the title. She never showed me this, Annie whispered. No, I think it hurt her too much. That doesn't make it hurt less now. I know. Annie set the badge down carefully and picked up the notebook. The first pages were ordinary. Patient initials, shift notes, reminders to buy milk, a recipe for cheap chicken soup, Noah's baby weight written years later in the margin. Then the handwriting changed. Shorter lines, less steady. Blackwater Road was not an accident, not the way they will tell it. Annie's pulse moved into her ears. She turned the page. Thomas says to wait, says timing matters, says panic will hurt workers. I want to believe him because the boy was coughing in my arms and he looked at me like I was the only safe thing left in the world. Another page. Street Agnes called me unreliable today. I have never been so tired of being polite. Annie put one hand over her mouth. Mrs. Laverne whispered, Lord, Mara. Annie kept reading. If Annie ever asks why I stayed quiet, tell her I thought silence could be a roof. I did not know it could become a cage. The next page had been torn out. Only a strip remained near the binding, with a few words still visible. If I disappear, ask about Caleb. Annie looked up. Who is Caleb? Mrs. Laverne's face changed. You know that name. I know a Caleb worked near the hauling company back then. Caleb Monroe, I think. Young man. Drove trucks or rode with them. After Blackwater Road. He left town fast. Why? People said he got a better job in Ohio. People said a lot of things about my mother, too. Mrs. Laverne nodded once. Yes, they did. Annie closed the notebook, but her hand stayed on top of it. The anger she had carried from the diner had changed shape. It was no longer hot and wild. It had narrowed into something steadier. I need to find him. You need to be careful. I've been careful my whole life. Look where that got us. Mrs. Laverne reached across the table and covered Annie's hand with her own. Careful kept you and Noah alive. Don't speak lightly of what kept breath in your house. Annie softened, but only a little. Then what am I supposed to do? Be careful and be loud. The answer stayed with her. Annie packed the notebook, the badge, the letter, and the photograph into her backpack. It felt different now, heavier, but less empty. At the door, Mrs. Laverne stopped her and pressed a foil-wrapped square of cornbread into her hand. For Noah, Annie nodded. Thank you. And Annie? She turned. Your mother was not weak because she got tired. Don't you ever let them make you confuse the two. Annie looked at the old woman. At the house that had kept pieces of Mara safe when Mara herself could not. And for the first time since Richard Hawthorne walked into the diner, she felt something other than shock. She felt direction. Outside, the cold hit her face. She walked to the Ford and set the backpack on the passenger seat with care. The torn page had given her only one name, but sometimes one name was enough to turn grief into a road. Caleb Monroe. Annie started the car. This time, when the engine coughed, she did not curse it. She simply waited, hand steady on the wheel, until it caught. Annie did make it to the laundry on Mercer, but only because money had a way of dragging a person back to the present no matter what the past had just handed them. For 4 hours, she fed sheets into a machine that steamed her face and burned the backs of her fingers when she moved too fast. She kept Mara's notebook in her backpack under the folding table, and every few minutes her eyes went to it as if it might open by itself and say more. At noon, her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She let it ring twice, then answered because people who could ignore unknown numbers usually had savings. Annie Carter? Richard Hawthorne's voice. She looked toward the front desk where Mrs. Nolan was arguing with a man about a missing shirt. How did you get this number? You gave it to my assistant last night. I gave it so your people would stop blocking the diner door. I'm sorry. You say that a lot. I've had reason to. Annie pulled the phone tighter to her ear. I'm at work. I know. I'll be brief. I spoke to someone who can look for Caleb Monroe. Annie went still. The dryer behind her thumped with a pair of work boots somebody had ignored the signs and put inside anyway. You already knew his name? I had seen it in an old file, but it meant nothing to me until you called this morning and asked whether my father ever mentioned a Caleb. Annie, if he is the man I think he is, he worked for the hauling contractor tied to Blackwater Road. Where is he? I don't know yet. That means you know something. A pause. It means my father's files had one forwarding address, outside Youngstown, Ohio. It's old. Give it to me. I don't think you should go alone. Annie laughed once, without humor. You don't know what I do alone. I'm learning. That quiet answer bothered her because it did not sound like performance. It sounded like a man who had started counting things too late. Before she could answer, Mrs. Nolan waved from the front. "Annie, phone later. We've got pickup orders." Annie lowered her voice. "Text me the address." Annie texted. She hung up before he could make concern sound like permission. By the time her shift ended, rain had begun tapping at the laundry windows. Not snow. Not yet. But cold enough to make the streets shine under the traffic lights. Annie checked her phone. Richard had sent the address, plus another message. "Please do not go without telling someone." She almost deleted it. Then she thought of Noah and texted Mrs. Laverne that she might be late after school. She did not mention Ohio. She did not mention Caleb. She told herself that was not lying, only managing worry. At Cole's diner, the afternoon shift felt different the moment she walked in. Conversations dipped, then rose again with a false casualness. Marvin Pike was not there, but his absence did not remove him. It only left room for what he had said to spread. Derek Cole met her near the kitchen. "You okay to work today?" Annie looked at him. "Meaning?" "Meaning there was a situation last night. There was a man insulting my dead mother last night." "You mean that situation?" Derek glanced toward the counter. "I mean the Hawthorne situation. People are asking questions. Then people can order coffee while they ask." He rubbed the back of his neck. "Just keep it smooth, all right? We don't need attention." Annie tied on her apron. "Funny how attention only bothers you when it lands on the people getting stepped on." He sighed like she had disappointed him by noticing. "Annie, I'm working, Mr. Cole." The dinner rush was thin. Rain kept older customers home, and the ones who came in ordered soup, grilled cheese, coffee, pie warmed too long in the microwave. Annie moved from table to table, polite because Mara had taught her that manners were not surrender. But every time someone looked at her a second too long, she felt the letter under her thoughts. At 6:30, Noah called. She answered near the soda machine. "You home?" "Yeah." "You used the inhaler?" A pause too small for anyone else to hear. "Noah, I used it at school." "How many times?" "Just twice." Her stomach tightened. "How are you breathing now?" "I'm okay." "Put Mrs. Alvarez on." "I'm not with her. I came upstairs. I didn't want to bother her." Annie closed her eyes. "You are not a bother." "I know. You don't say it like you know." "I'm okay, Annie. Really." A customer at booth 4 raised a hand for more coffee. Derek looked over from the register. Annie turned her back to him. "Listen to me. Sit up. Don't lie down. Take one more puff if your chest feels tight, and I'm coming home early. You'll get in trouble." "You let me worry about trouble. But you need the money." There it was again, the child trying to keep the roof up with both hands. "Not more than I need you breathing." She found Derek near the kitchen window. "I have to leave." His face changed before she finished the sentence. "Annie, you just got here. Noah's breathing bad. Can Mrs. Alvarez sit with him?" "I said I have to leave." He lowered his voice. "You walk out in the middle of dinner. I can't promise hours next week." Annie untied her apron slowly. "Then don't promise. Don't be dramatic." She put the apron on the shelf. "My brother is 9. He is home alone with asthma. That is not drama. That is my life." No one in the kitchen spoke. Even the cook paused with a spatula in his hand. Annie grabbed her backpack and left through the front because she was tired of side doors. By the time she reached Maple Row, rain had soaked through her sleeves. Noah was on the couch, sitting forward, shoulders lifted with each breath. His face was calm in the way children try to be calm when they are scared of scaring you. She dropped beside him. "Hey, look at me. I'm okay. You are not okay. I didn't want you to lose your job. You don't get to make that choice." His breathing whistled. Annie helped him take the inhaler, counted with him, watched his chest, waited. It helped, but not enough. His lips were not blue, thank God, but his ribs pulled too hard under his shirt. She got his coat. "No hospital," Noah said. "Yes, hospital." "It costs." "Yes," she said, voice breaking around the word. "It does." The Ford fought her in the rain, but it started. Noah sat in the passenger seat with his knees tucked up, breathing shallowly, one hand gripping the inhaler. Annie drove to street, Agnes with both hands on the wheel and every old fear sitting beside her. Hospitals had a way of asking poor people questions before offering relief. Insurance. Guardian. Payment. Address. Next of kin. They made need stand in line and prove it deserved help. At the emergency entrance, She helped Noah inside. The waiting room smelled like disinfectant and wet coats. A television played local news with the sound off. Behind the desk, a nurse looked up. Name? Noah Carter, 9, asthma. He's having trouble breathing. The nurse's eyes moved to Noah, then softened. Bring him here, sweetheart. For a few minutes, Mercy moved faster than paperwork. They took Noah back, put a mask over his face, checked his oxygen. Annie stood beside the bed, answering questions. Insurance? Medicaid application pending. It was under my mother before she passed. Are you his legal guardian? I'm his sister. Do you have paperwork? It's at home. I mean, some of it. I'm 18. Our mother died 3 months ago. The nurse did not say anything unkind, but Annie heard the machine of the system turning on. A young woman in registration came with forms. Another asked for contact information. Someone mentioned social services in a tone meant to be helpful. Annie's grip tightened on the rail of Noah's bed. Noah pulled the mask aside. Am I in trouble? She leaned down and put it back gently. No, baby. Breathe. He whispered through the mask. Are they gonna take me? No. The word came fast, sharp, terrified. Annie lowered her voice. No. Not while I'm standing here, but standing there did not feel like enough. Not against forms, policies, balances owed, adults with badges clipped to their shirts. Her phone buzzed. Richard. She ignored it. It buzzed again. She stepped into the hall, close enough to see Noah through the curtain, and answered in a whisper full of anger. Not now. I'm sorry. Are you at Street Agnes? She froze. How would you know that? You told my assistant your brother had asthma. You left the diner suddenly. I called because I was worried. That's not an answer. No, it's not a good one. She looked through the curtain at Noah, small under hospital light. They're asking about guardianship, insurance, money. I don't have time to make rich people feel better. I can help. I don't want your help. I know. You don't know anything. I know my father promised your mother a future, and tonight your brother is struggling to breathe in a hospital named on a wall my family paid for. Let me do one useful thing before you decide what to do with the rest. Annie closed her eyes. Pride rose first. Then Noah coughed behind the curtain. She opened her eyes. No cameras, no lawyers in my face, no papers for me to sign. Agreed. No charity speeches. Agreed. And if anyone from your family tries to use my brother to make me quiet, I will burn your name to the ground. Richard paused. I believe you. Annie hated that the same answer steadied her. Within 20 minutes, a hospital administrator appeared, suddenly polite in the way institutions became polite when a donor's name entered the room. Annie noticed. She noticed everything. Noah received treatment, a prescription refill, and a follow-up appointment without anyone asking Annie to explain her worth again. That should have relieved her. It did, and it shamed her, and the shame made her angry. When Noah finally slept in the observation room, his breathing even, Annie sat beside him with her backpack on her lap. The notebook, the letter, the badge, the torn clue about Caleb were all inside. Her mother had once walked these same halls in a Street Agnes jacket, dreaming of a title the world had kept from her. Now Annie sat there as a patient's guardian, still outside every door money could open. Richard arrived just before midnight, alone, rain on his coat. He stopped at the doorway, not entering until Annie looked up. How is he? Breathing. Good. For now. Richard accepted that. Annie looked down at Noah, then back at the man whose family name was carved somewhere in this hospital, probably in brass. I don't want pity, she said. I know. No. Listen. I don't want a quiet payment. I don't want some check that makes everyone feel generous while my mother stays a rumor. Richard's face changed. He understood before she said the rest. Annie reached into her backpack and touched Mara's badge. I want the truth. All of it. And if your family hurt my mother, I want the world to know her name. Richard stood very still. Then he nodded. All right, he said. Then we start with Blackwater Road. Richard did not take Annie to the Hawthorne Foundation the next morning. She had made that clear before Noah was discharged from Street. Agnes with a paper bag of medication, a follow-up appointment, and a tired little smile that nearly broke her. No foundation office, no glass conference room, no portraits of dead Hawthorns watching her from the walls. So Richard chose his father's old private office instead, a small brick building behind the closed Hawthorne rail yard on the east side of Ashford. He said Thomas Hawthorne had kept it long after the company moved its headquarters to Pittsburgh. Annie did not know what to make of that. Rich men keeping extra offices sounded like poor people keeping extra shoes, except one was called Legacy and the other was called Clutter. Mrs. Laverne stayed with Noah for the morning. Annie had almost refused, but the old woman shut that down with one look. "That boy needs rest, and you need answers," Mrs. Laverne said. "Don't confuse doing everything alone with doing right by him." Now Annie sat in Richard's car, Mara's badge and notebook in her backpack, watching Ashford pass by in pieces. The boarded hardware store, the laundromat, the closed mill gates with weeds coming through the chain link. Richard drove himself. No assistant. No driver. The car was quiet in the way. Expensive things were quiet, as if the outside world had to ask permission to enter. Annie kept her backpack on her lap. "You can put that in the back seat," Richard said. "I know." He did not say anything else. The rail yard appeared beyond a row of bare sycamores. Rusted tracks ran behind the old brick office, disappearing toward warehouses that had not seen steady work in years. A faded sign still clung to the fence. Hawthorne Industrial Freight. Annie read it twice. "My mother used to say the east side smelled like pennies after rain," she said before she meant to. Richard looked through the windshield. "Because of the rail dust." She never said why. She knew more about this place than I did. The office smelled faintly of paper, dust, and old wood. It was not grand. That surprised her. There was a desk, 2 file cabinets, a map of the county pinned to one wall, and a framed photograph of Thomas Hawthorne standing beside a younger Richard at a groundbreaking ceremony. Richard in the picture was a boy in a blazer, squinting into the sun, one hand caught in his father's. Annie looked away first. Richard unlocked a file cabinet. "I brought copies of what I could. Some documents are missing. Some were clearly altered. I won't pretend this is complete. You keep saying that like it makes it better. It doesn't. It keeps me from lying." That answer sat between them while he placed a stack of folders on the desk. The first folder was labeled Blackwater Road Incident, October 17. Annie noticed the word incident, not disaster, not spill, not cover-up. A company word, clean enough to hide blood under. Richard opened a county map and pointed to a narrow road outside Ashford. "Here, Blackwater Road runs between the old chemical storage site and the South Bridge." That night, a tanker truck connected to our hauling contractor overturned near the bend. "Our," Annie repeated. "My family's contractor," he corrected. "No, say it the first way. It's more honest." Richard accepted that with a small nod. "Our contractor." He showed her a photocopied report. The print was faded, the margins marked in red by someone years earlier. The official version said the truck was carrying industrial cleaning solvent within legal transport limits. The driver lost control because of freezing rain. Emergency crews responded. Minor exposure injuries. No fatalities. Annie looked at him. "And the unofficial version?" Richard turned another page. "The truck was overloaded. The manifest was changed after the accident. The chemical mix was more dangerous than reported, and the driver had complained about the brakes 2 days earlier." Annie stared at the page but saw Mara in the grainy photograph from the library, one hand raised against the rain. "How many people were out there?" "At least 12 near the road. Workers from the storage site. 2 drivers. My father, me, your mother. You were 7. "Yes. Do you remember her?" Richard's fingers rested on the folder. "I remember a woman's voice telling me not to sleep." Annie's throat tightened before she could stop it. She kept saying, "Stay mad if you have to, baby. But stay awake." I didn't know what that meant. I was coughing, crying. I wanted my father. She wrapped something around my face. A scarf, maybe. "My mother had a blue scarf," Annie said. "She wore it until I was little. There was a burnt place near one end. She told me it got caught in a dryer." Richard looked at her, and something in his face gave way. "It was raining ice," he said. "I remember her hands were cold when she touched my face. She kept apologizing for that." That sounded so much like Mara that Annie had to sit down. Richard waited. He did not crowd the silence. When she could speak, her voice was flat. "Keep going." He opened another folder. This one held photographs. Black road. White rain. A tanker on its side. Headlights caught in mist. Men in reflective jackets. A sedan half off the shoulder. And there, in one photo, Mara, younger. Wet hair stuck to her cheek. Hospital jacket over scrubs. One arm around a worker. who looked barely able to stand. Annie touched the edge of the picture but did not pick it up. She saved them too? Yes. Then why isn't her name in the report? Richard slid over the official incident summary. Annie scanned it until she found the witness section. Unidentified female passerby reported possible vapor exposure. Statement inconsistent. Left seen before full interview. Annie read it again. Unidentified. Inconsistent. Left. They erased her while she was still standing there, she said. Richard did not answer. Annie looked up. Did your father write this? No. Company counsel prepared the final version. Eleanor? She was already involved with the foundation then, but she sat on the family risk committee. Her signature is on the review memo. He placed another document before her. Eleanor Hawthorne's name appeared at the bottom, neat and sharp. Annie felt the anger move through her slowly, like heat finding metal. What did my mother sign? Richard opened the last folder. A witness clarification. Company words again. Yes. The document had Mara's signature on the final page. Annie recognized it. The long M, the careful C, the letters steady, even when life had not been. She read the paragraph above it. I did not personally verify the contents of the tanker. Any statements made by me at the scene regarding cargo or safety conditions were based on stress, confusion, and limited visibility. Annie stood. She saw it. Yes. She wrote in her notebook that she saw the placard and the second manifest. Yes. And they made her say she didn't. Richard's voice was low. They made her say she could not verify it. That is the same lie wearing a tie. He looked down. Annie paced to the map, then back. What did they offer her? Protection, tuition assistance, a position after training. According to my father's letter, he believed those promises were being processed. But they weren't. No. Who stopped them? Richard did not answer. Annie laughed once. Your sister. She controlled the legal review after my father recused himself. Recused himself? Annie turned on him. He was there. He was alive because of her. He didn't get to recuse himself. I know. No, you don't. You grew up with buildings named after your family. I grew up watching my mother buy cough syrup with quarters. You don't know what one signature cost her. Richard's face went pale, but he did not look away. You're right. Again that answer. Annie hated it less now. That made her angrier. She grabbed Mara's badge from her backpack and set it on the desk. This was hers. Richard looked at it. She carved, someday, nurse on the back, Annie said. Did that show up in your files? No. Of course not. She picked the badge back up before the office could claim it too. Richard opened a small drawer in the desk. There is one more thing. Annie stiffened. You keep having one more thing. I know. He removed a cassette tape in a clear plastic case. A handwritten label ran across it. T.H. Privet Notes. Blackwater. My father recorded notes late in life. Some were business, some personal. I found this with the letter. You listened to it? Yes. And? It mentions your mother. It mentions someone named Caleb Monroe. Annie's hand tightened around the badge. Play it. Richard hesitated. Some of it is difficult. Play it. He had an old cassette player on the shelf, already plugged in. That detail told Annie he had planned for this. Richard inserted the tape and pressed the button. Static filled the room, then an old man's voice, thin but clear. I have spent years calling it an accident because that is the word men use when responsibility has too many owners. Blackwater was not simply weather. It was speed, pressure, profit, and the belief that rules are negotiable when the buyer is large enough. Annie stopped breathing for a second. The voice continued. Mara Carter knew. God help me, she knew before most of my own people admitted it. She pulled my son from the car. She pulled Harlan Briggs from the ditch. She stood in the road waving traffic back, while vapor crossed the asphalt. And by morning, my family had begun teaching the record to doubt her. Richard stood near the desk, still as stone. The tape clicked, hissed, then continued. Caleb Monroe saw the second manifest. He saw what she saw. Eleanor said he had been handled. I let that sentence pass through a room and did not challenge it. There are sins of action and sins of silence. Mine wore a good suit and lived in my house for 30 years. The tape went to static. Annie stared at the machine. Caleb Monroe saw the second manifest. Eleanor said he had been handled. The office felt smaller. Richard pressed stop. Annie's voice came out quiet. Handled means threatened. Yes. Or paid. Possibly. Or worse. Richard did not answer. She turned toward the county map. Blackwater Road was just a line there, ink on paper. But to Mara, it had been the place where one life split into before and after. To Thomas Hawthorne, it had been guilt. To Eleanor, a risk. To Richard, a memory he had been allowed to outgrow. To Annie, it was becoming a road she had inherited. "Where is Caleb?" she asked. "I found an old forwarding address near Youngstown. Nothing current yet." "Then make it current. I already have someone looking." "No," Annie said. "We look." Richard studied her. "This could get ugly." It already was. We're just catching up. Outside, a freight horn sounded somewhere beyond the dead rail yard, long and low. Annie put Mara's badge back into her backpack, then slid the copy of the witness statement beside it. She moved carefully now, not because she was calm, but because she understood the value of what was in her hands. At the door, she looked back at the office, the folders, the map, the tape. "My mother stood in poison to save your family," she said. "Then your family poisoned her name." Richard closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them, Annie saw grief there, but she did not make room for it. "Not yet. Find Caleb Monroe," she said. Richard nodded. "And Mr. Hawthorne?" "Yes? Don't ask me to trust you. Bring me something worth trusting." Then Annie walked out into the cold yard, past rusted tracks and weeds growing through old gravel, carrying the first proof that Mara Carter had not been unreliable at all. She had been dangerous to the truth they wanted buried. Eleanor Hawthorne did not wait for Annie to find Caleb Monroe. By late afternoon, before Annie had even made it back to Maple Row, Richard called her twice. She ignored the first call because she was standing in line at the pharmacy, counting the cost of Noah's refill against the cash in her pocket. She ignored the second because the woman behind the counter had just told her the discount card helped, but not enough. When the phone buzzed a third time, Annie stepped away from the line. "What?" Richard did not waste time. "My sister knows." Annie looked through the pharmacy window at the gray street outside. "Knows what?" "That you have the letter. That you saw the files. Possibly, that Caleb's name came up." "Possibly? I don't know how much. You said those files were private." "They were. That doesn't mean I was the only one watching them." Annie closed her eyes. Of course, in Richard's world, even secrets had staff. "What does she want?" "To meet you." Annie laughed once, short and tired. "No, I told her that." "And?" "She said she would come to you." Annie's hand tightened around the phone. "Tell her I'm not hard to find. Poor people rarely are." "Annie, Eleanor doesn't ask for meetings unless she already knows what she wants from them." "Good. Then she can learn disappointment." There was a pause. "Don't go alone. I'm at a pharmacy, Mr. Hawthorne. Unless she plans to jump me between cough drops and antacids. I'll manage." "That isn't funny. It wasn't meant to be." She hung up and went back to the counter. The pharmacist slid Noah's inhaler across with the receipt folded under it. Annie paid, and the amount left in her wallet made her stomach go quiet. Not empty. Quiet. There was a difference. Empty asked for food. Quiet started making plans about what could be skipped. When she stepped outside, a black Lincoln was parked near the curb, the back window lowered. "Miss Carter." Eleanor Hawthorne's voice was smooth enough to be mistaken for polite if a person had not spent her life learning the difference between kindness and manners. Annie stopped on the sidewalk. The rain had ended, but the air still held damp cold. Eleanor sat in the back seat wearing a cream coat, pearl earrings, and a look that made the pharmacy, the cracked curb, and Annie's old backpack seem like things that had been allowed too near her by mistake. "I was told you wanted to talk," Annie said. "I hoped we might do it somewhere more comfortable." "I'm comfortable standing." Eleanor's eyes moved to the pharmacy bag in Annie's hand. "This won't take long. That's what people say before they take too much." For the first time, Eleanor's expression shifted. "Not much. Enough. Get in the car, Miss Carter." "No." The driver looked straight ahead. Eleanor gave a small sigh, as if Annie had chosen inconvenience out of bad breeding. "Then we'll talk here, though I doubt you want your personal business discussed on a public sidewalk." Annie stepped closer to the car, but not close enough for Eleanor to think she had obeyed. "My personal business became public when your family wrote it into company records." Eleanor's mouth tightened. "Richard has always been sentimental where our father is concerned. Grief can make a man reckless. Your father wrote a letter." "My father wrote many things in his final years. He wrote my mother saved his life." Eleanor looked at Annie then, really looked, and the softness left her face. "Your mother was present during a difficult night. That does not make her a saint." "No," Annie said. Saving your brother and your father did that. Eleanor's eyes cooled. Careful. There it is. What? The part where manners run out. Eleanor opened the car door herself and stepped onto the sidewalk. She was taller than Annie expected, slim and straight-backed. A woman who had spent decades entering rooms that were already prepared for her. Up close, her perfume was light and expensive. Annie thought of Mara coming home smelling like bleach and coffee and winter sweat. I understand your situation, Eleanor said. No, ma'am. You understand my address. You are 18 years old, caring for a sick child, with unstable housing and limited income. You are in no position to wage war against a family whose lawyers have handled matters more complicated than a waitress's grievance. Annie felt the words hit, each one chosen to leave no bruise anyone could photograph. My mother's name was Mara Carter. I know her name. Then use it. Eleanor smiled faintly. Mara Carter signed a statement. That statement is part of the record. If you intend to challenge it, you will also be challenging your mother's own words. Words your people put in her mouth. A serious accusation. An old habit, from what I can tell. Eleanor reached into her handbag and removed a folded document. She held it out. Annie did not take it. What is that? A practical solution. I've heard that phrase before. Usually means somebody poor is about to be told to disappear. It is a settlement offer, more generous than any court would likely award you, assuming a court heard the matter at all. Enough to settle your rent, pay for your brother's care, cover your education at a local program, and give you a start. Annie looked at the paper, then at Eleanor. In exchange for? Privacy. Silence. Privacy, Eleanor repeated. There is dignity in not turning every family tragedy into a public spectacle. Annie almost laughed. Whose dignity? Eleanor's gaze sharpened. You should think carefully. People will ask questions about your mother. About why she signed what she signed. About why she waited. About why no one in this town seemed to believe her. Because families like yours taught them not to. You have spirit. I can see why Richard feels responsible. But spirit is not rent. It is not legal representation. It is not custody. Stability. For your brother. That landed too close. Annie's hand tightened around Noah's medicine bag. Eleanor saw it. Of course she did. If authorities were to question whether you are equipped to care for a child with medical needs, it would be unfortunate. Not my desire, obviously. But these things happen when private matters become chaotic. For 1 second, Annie saw Noah on the couch, trying to breathe and apologizing for the cost of it. Her fear rose fast. She had to hold herself still so Eleanor would not see all of it. You threatening a 9-year-old now? Annie asked. I am advising you that the adult world is not moved by emotion. No, just money. Money is often what keeps children safe. Annie looked at the folded document again. Rent. Medicine. School. The words were not on the page yet, but she felt them waiting there. The ugliest kind of trap was the kind that offered something truly needed. Eleanor softened her voice. That made it worse. Miss Carter, your mother is gone. Nothing said publicly will bring her back. But you and your brother are alive. You can still make wise choices. Take the help. Let the dead rest. Annie thought of Mara's badge in her backpack. Someday, nurse. She thought of the company report calling her mother unreliable. She thought of Thomas Hawthorne's recorded voice. My family had begun teaching the record to doubt her. My mother has been resting under a lie, Annie said. That's not peace. Eleanor held her gaze. You imagine truth will save you. No, Annie said. I imagine hiding it already ruined us. The driver shifted in the front seat. Eleanor folded the document and slipped it back into her bag. You will find Richard's guilt has limits. Maybe. And when it does, then I'll know he's still a Hawthorne. Eleanor gave a small, cold smile. You are very young. I've had to be older than that. For the first time, something like irritation broke through Eleanor's polish. Girls like you should be careful when old money opens old doors. Sometimes there's nothing behind them but lawyers. Annie stepped closer. Women like my mother learned that doors owned by people like you usually lock from the outside. Eleanor's face went still. The black car sat at the curb, engine running, warm inside. Behind Annie, the pharmacy door opened, and an older man came out with a cane and a paper bag. He glanced at them, then kept walking. Just another scene in Ashford. A rich woman, a poor girl, A conversation nobody wanted to overhear because overhearing might require choosing a side. Eleanor turned toward the car, then paused. If you repeat accusations you cannot prove, we will respond. What? My family, the foundation, the company, institutions do not survive by allowing emotional narratives to rewrite history. Annie nodded slowly. That's what you call my mother? An emotional narrative? I call her a woman who signed a statement, and I call her the woman who pulled your brother out of poison. Eleanor opened the car door. Good evening, Miss Carter. Tell your driver to be careful near Blackwater Road, Annie said. Eleanor looked back. Bad things happen there when hawthorns are in a hurry. For a moment, Eleanor's face gave Annie something she had not expected. Not anger, fear. Then the door closed, and the Lincoln pulled away from the curb, smooth and silent, leaving Annie on the sidewalk with Noah's medicine in her hand and her pulse beating hard in her throat. She stood there until the car turned the corner. Only then did she realize her hands were shaking. She hated that most. Not the threat. Not the settlement. Not even Eleanor's careful way of saying she could make Noah part of the fight. She hated that her body believed the danger before her pride could argue. Her phone buzzed again. Richard. She answered without greeting. She came, Annie said. A curse slipped out of him, low and sharp. She offered money, privacy. Then she mentioned Noah. Richard went quiet. Annie listened to that quiet and let it tell her what his words had not yet said. She can do that? Annie asked. She can make calls. She can create concerns. She can make things harder than they already are. Harder for who? Be specific. For you. And you? For me too, but not the same way. At least he did not lie. Annie walked toward the Ford. She said your guilt has limits. She's wrong. We'll see. Annie. I'm sorry. Stop being sorry and find Caleb. I have someone checking the Ohio address now. No. I want everything on him. Work records, forwarding addresses. Who paid him? Who scared him? Who made him vanish? I'll get it. You better. She hung up and sat in the car, pharmacy bag on her lap. Rainwater ran down the windshield in thin, crooked lines. Across the street, the Hawthorne Foundation scholarship poster was taped inside the library window. A smiling Eleanor stood in the photograph beside 3 students in caps and gowns. Annie stared at it for a long time. Then she took Mara's notebook from her backpack and opened to the torn page. If I disappear, ask about Caleb. Eleanor had not come because of the letter alone. She had come because Caleb mattered. That meant the torn page was not a dead end. It was a warning someone had been afraid Mara would leave behind. Annie started the Ford and pulled away from the curb. The car groaned. The wipers dragged across the glass, and Noah's medicine slid across the seat beside her. By the time she reached Maple Row, her fear had not left. It had changed jobs. It was no longer there to stop her. It was there to keep her awake. By morning, Ashford had already decided what Annie had done. No one had asked her, but that had never stopped the town before. A place like Ashford did not need facts when it had front porches, church parking lots, diner counters, and Facebook pages run by women who typed, just asking before ruining somebody's name. Annie learned it before breakfast. Mrs. Alvarez knocked while Noah was still at the table with cereal gone soft in the bowl. Annie opened the door and found the older woman standing there in slippers and a sweater, her phone in one hand, her face pinched with worry. Baby, Mrs. Alvarez said, you need to see this before you go out. Annie took the phone. The post came from Ashford Community Watch, though nobody ever watched anything useful there. Someone had shared a blurry picture of Annie outside the pharmacy, standing beside Eleanor Hawthorne's black Lincoln. The caption read, local girl connected to late Mara Carter, now meeting privately with Hawthorne family. Sources say possible settlement in works after years-old claims resurface. The comments had already started. Some said Annie was smart to get paid. Some said Mara must have taught her daughter the same tricks. One woman from church wrote that people should not judge, then wrote 3 more sentences doing exactly that. Marvin Pike had commented with a laughing emoji and the words, "Apple don't fall far." Noah came up behind Annie before she could turn the phone away. What does settlement mean? Mrs. Alvarez closed her eyes. I'm sorry, I didn't know he was behind you. Annie handed the phone back. It means people are talking because they don't have enough work to do. Noah looked at her. They're talking about Mama again. I know. Why? Because dead black women were easy targets when rich white families needed distance. Because poor people's grief became public property the minute money was mentioned. because folks who had never brought Mara a casserole when she was sick now had entire theories about her life. Annie said none of that. Because they don't know the truth, she said. Noah's face tightened. Then tell them. I will. When? The question was simple. That made it worse. Annie crouched in front of him and fixed the collar of his shirt, though it did not need fixing. Not by yelling into the street. We have to be smart. He nodded, but he did not look satisfied. At 9 years old, smart and silent still sounded too much alike. Annie walked him to the bus stop because she did not trust the morning. The other parents stood in small clusters, coffee cups in hand, pretending not to stare. A woman Annie knew from the grocery store gave her a smile that folded at the edges. Not friendly. Curious, Noah kept close to Annie's side. When the bus came, he climbed the steps, then turned back. You'll be here after school? If I'm not, Mrs. Alvarez will be, but I'll try. You always say try when you mean maybe, and you always hear too much. He gave her a small wave and disappeared down the aisle. Annie waited until the bus pulled away, then stood on the curb longer than she needed to. Across the street, 2 women lowered their voices too late. At Cole's diner, the bell over the door sounded louder than usual. Annie stepped inside and felt conversation bend around her. The breakfast crowd was mostly older men, retirees, a few construction workers, 2 nurses from street, Agnes and Derek at the register pretending to sort receipts. Marvin Pike was back on his stool. Of course he was. Annie hung up her coat and tied on her apron. Her hands moved from habit. Knot at the waist. Order pad in pocket. Pen behind the ear. Coffee pot lifted from the warmer. She had learned that work did not wait for humiliation to pass. At booth 2, Mrs. Hennessy would not meet her eyes. Morning, Annie said. Coffee? Yes, please, honey. Honey. Yesterday it had sounded normal. Today it sounded like pity wearing perfume. At the counter, Marvin turned his mug in a slow circle. Busy girl, Annie. Diner one day, Hawthorne car the next. Moving up. Annie poured coffee for a trucker and kept her voice steady. You want a refill, Mr. Pike? I want to know if I should start being nicer to you now or wait till the check clears. A few men chuckled. One stopped when Annie looked at him. Derek came out from near the kitchen. All right, let's keep it friendly. Annie set the pot back on the burner. Friendly would have been useful yesterday. Marvin leaned back. Now don't get touchy. Folks are just wondering. Your mama had that old Blackwater story hanging around her for years, and now a Hawthorne shows up with money? Looks like something finally paid off. The diner quieted. Annie felt her mother's badge in her backpack under the counter. She felt the notebook. The torn page. Caleb Monroe's name. Eleanor's threat. Noah asking what settlement meant. She wanted to pick up the coffee pot and throw it through the front window. Instead, she said, my mother is not your entertainment. Marvin's grin thinned. Then maybe don't put her business in the street. I didn't. Somebody did. Derek stepped closer, voice low. Annie, take 5. No. Annie. She turned to him. He can insult my dead mother in front of paying customers, and I'm the one who needs to take 5? Derek's face flushed. I'm trying to keep things from getting out of hand. They got out of hand when you decided silence was management. One of the nurses from Street Agnes looked down at her plate. The trucker at booth 4 muttered. Girl's got a point. But not loud enough to cost him anything. Marvin lifted both hands. All I'm saying is, where there's smoke. There was poison, Annie said. The words came out before she could stop them. The room changed. Marvin blinked. What? Annie knew she had said too much. Not enough to prove anything. Just enough to feed the town another piece to chew on. Derek saw it too. Kitchen. Now. This time Annie went, because staying would not help. In the narrow hallway by the walk-in cooler, Derek turned on her. What are you doing? My job, until you decided my grief was bad for business. You cannot bring this Hawthorne mess in here. I didn't bring it. Your customers did. You need this job. Annie laughed, but it hurt. You think I forgot? I think you're making choices like someone who has backup. That stopped her. Derek lowered his voice. Do you? Do I what? Have backup? Because if Hawthorne money is coming, say so. I can't have reporters or lawyers or God knows who showing up here. So this is about the diner. Yes, Annie, this is my diner. No, Mr. Cole, it's your counter, your grill, your cash register. But it's my mother's name they're scraping off their shoes. He looked tired then, not cruel, which somehow made him smaller. I'm sorry about Mara. I am. But sorry doesn't keep a place open. Funny, that's what everyone keeps teaching me. Sorry doesn't pay. Truth doesn't pay. Decency doesn't pay. But silence sure seems to. Derek did not answer. Her phone buzzed in her apron pocket. The school's number lit the screen. Annie's stomach dropped. She answered before the second ring. "This is Annie," a woman's voice, careful and professional. "Miss Carter, this is Mrs. Bell from Ashford Elementary. Noah is all right, but there's been an incident." "What kind of incident?" "He got into a fight on the playground." Annie closed her eyes. "Is he breathing okay?" "Yes, he used his inhaler. The nurse checked him. He's upset, but stable." "I'm coming." Derek's mouth tightened. Annie looked at him. "Don't. I didn't say anything." "You were about to." He looked away first. At the school, Noah sat outside the principal's office with a cold pack against his cheek and his backpack between his feet. His eyes were red, but he was not crying. A boy across from him, bigger by at least a head, had a split lip and the protected look of a child whose parents would be believed first. Noah saw Annie and tried to stand. She crossed the hall fast. "Sit. Breathe. I'm fine." "Don't start." Mrs. Bell, the assistant principal, came out with a folder. She was a white woman in her 40s with a voice trained to sound calm during unfair things. "Miss Carter, thank you for coming." "What happened?" Mrs. Bell glanced toward the other boy. "There was a disagreement." Noah muttered. "He called Mama a liar." Mrs. Bell said. Noah reacted physically. The other boy looked at the floor. Annie turned to Noah. "Did you hit him first?" Noah's jaw worked. "He said Mama lied so you could get money from rich people. He said maybe she died before she could spend it." Annie felt the hall tilt, but she kept her voice even. "Did you hit him first?" Noah looked at her, ashamed and furious. "Yes." "Okay." Mrs. Bell seemed relieved by the admission. "We understand emotions are high at home, but Noah needs a stable environment and appropriate coping." Annie looked at her. "Finish that sentence carefully." Mrs. Bell paused. Annie stood, suddenly aware of every adult in the office pretending not to listen. "My brother heard grown people call his dead mother a liar. He is 9. He was wrong to hit. I'll handle that. But don't sit behind that desk and make his pain sound like a behavior plan." Mrs. Bell's face colored. "That is not what I meant." "It's what you said." Noah stared at Annie like she had just done something dangerous and wonderful. A man in a work jacket came in then, the other boy's father. He looked at Annie, then at Noah, then at Mrs. Bell. "My son says this kid jumped him." Annie turned. "Your son called our mother a liar." The man shrugged. "Kids repeat things." "Yes," Annie said. "They do." The words hung there long enough for him to understand them. Mrs. Bell cleared her throat. "We're not assigning suspension today. I think a restorative conversation." "No," Annie said. "Excuse me?" "No restorative conversation where my brother has to sit across from a boy who learned cruelty at home and pretend both sides are equal. Noah will apologize for hitting. That's his part. Your part is making sure children don't use dead parents as playground weapons." Mrs. Bell had no quick answer. Noah whispered, "I'm sorry." Annie looked down at him. "I know. You're still apologizing to him before we leave." His face fell. "You don't hit because people lie," she said. "You stand longer than the lie." "I was standing." "I know." They kept laughing. The sentence broke her more than if he had cried. She took him home after the apology. He was quiet in the car, staring out the window with the cold pack in his lap. "Are you mad?" he asked. "Yes." "At me?" "A little." He nodded. "Mostly at everybody else." He looked over. "That's a lot of people." "I've got room." That got the smallest smile out of him. When they reached Maple Row, Richard's car was parked at the curb. Annie almost drove past it. Richard stepped out before she could decide, holding a folder in one hand. His face changed when he saw Noah's cheek. "What happened?" Noah looked at him. "People talk." Richard's eyes moved to Annie. She got out of the car. "You said your sister knew. Now the whole town knows something. Not the truth. Just enough to make my brother bleed for it." Richard took that without defending himself. "I'm sorry," Noah said. "Do rich people only know those 2 words?" Annie almost told him to be polite. She did not. Richard looked at Noah. "Sometimes we learn them late." Noah considered that, then went upstairs with the apartment key. Annie waited until he was out of earshot. "Why are you here?" Richard lifted the folder. "We found a current lead on Caleb Monroe. The cold around Annie seemed to sharpen. Where? Outside Youngstown. A rental under a different name. But the social security records match. He's alive. Annie looked up at the apartment window where Noah's small shape moved behind the curtain. Then she looked back at Richard. The town had laughed. The school had called. Derek had warned her. Eleanor had threatened her. And Caleb Monroe was alive. When do we go? Annie asked. Richard hesitated. Tomorrow morning, if you're ready. Annie thought of Noah's bruised cheek, Mara's torn notebook page, and the way lies traveled faster than working cars in a town like Ashford. I'm ready now, she said. Richard shook his head. Noah needs you tonight. That was the first thing he had said all day that sounded like he understood something. Annie looked away, hating that he was right. Tomorrow, she said. Richard nodded. Tomorrow. That night, after Noah fell asleep with the airplane blanket pulled to his chin, Annie sat at the kitchen table and opened Mara's notebook again. She read the torn line until the words stopped looking like words and became a door. If I disappear, ask about Caleb. Outside, Ashford kept talking. Inside, Annie began listening to the dead. Morning came with low clouds and a hard wind that pushed loose trash along Maple Row like the town was trying to sweep itself clean and failing. Annie packed Noah's lunch before he woke. 2 peanut butter sandwiches because he was growing. Apple slices gone. A little brown at the edges. And the last juice box from the pantry. She wrote his name on the paper bag even though he was too old for that, then crossed it out because she did not want anyone at school making him pay for one more thing. Mrs. Alvarez came over at 7:30 in a coat over her house dress, carrying a rosary in one hand and a grocery bag in the other. I brought eggs, she said. Annie opened the door wider. Mrs. Alvarez, you don't have to keep feeding us. I know, that is why it still counts. Noah came out rubbing his eyes. The bruise on his cheek had darkened overnight. Mrs. Alvarez saw it and made a sound under her breath in Spanish. You win? She asked. Noah blinked. Mrs. Alvarez, Annie said. What? If he got in trouble, I hope at least he won. For the first time since the school office. Noah smiled. Kind of. Good. Now don't do it again. He nodded like that was fair. Annie checked his inhaler twice. Then Mrs. Alvarez's eyes caught the backpack by the door, the folder inside, the way Annie had braided her hair tight and put on the same good shirt from the library meeting. You going after that man? Mrs. Alvarez asked. Caleb Monroe. I don't know him. Neither do I. That is not comforting. No, ma'am. Mrs. Alvarez studied her. You taking the rich one? Richard's driving. Good. Let his car take the miles. Yours sounds like it prays before turning over. Noah looked up from tying his shoes. Where are you going? Annie had been ready for the question and still did not like it. Ohio. Today? Yes. With Mr. Hawthorne? Yes. Noah's smile disappeared. For Mama? Annie crouched in front of him. For Mama. And for us. What if the man doesn't talk? Then I ask better. What if he lies? Then I listen for where it bends. Noah thought that over. Can I come? No. I knew that was coming. You have school. I got punched at school. You also punched back. So you're going. He looked away, jaw tight. Annie softened and touched his sleeve. I need you safe today. That helps me. He hated being managed by love, but he nodded. Richard arrived a little after 8, in a dark sedan that looked too quiet for Maple Row. He did not honk. He parked at the curb and waited outside the car, hands in his coat pockets, while Annie walked Noah to Mrs. Alvarez's door. Noah looked Richard up and down. You better bring her back. Richard did not smile. I will. That's not a rich guy promise, is it? No, Richard said. That's mine. Noah accepted it with suspicion, which Annie considered wise. The drive out of Ashford began in silence. Annie kept her backpack at her feet, one hand resting on the zipper. Inside were Mara's notebook, the badge, Thomas Hawthorne's letter, the photograph from Blackwater Road, and copies of the witness statement. She had packed them like a person leaving with proof of identity after a fire. Richard took the highway west, past closed mills, storage lots, churches with letterboards, and farms sleeping under winter stubble. The radio stayed off. After 20 miles, the silence stopped feeling respectful and started feeling like another room someone had locked. Annie broke it. Tell me what you found. Richard kept his eyes on the road. Caleb Monroe worked for Dunley Transport, the contractor hauling the chemical load that night. He was listed as an assistant driver. though my father's notes suggest he may have been the one who saw the second manifest before it disappeared. Assistant driver means what? Sometimes loading checks, sometimes paperwork, sometimes riding along because the primary driver had exceeded hours. Was he supposed to be on that truck? No, that's one of the problems. His name appears on an early internal memo, then vanishes from the final file. People don't vanish from paper by accident. No. Who made him vanish? I don't know yet. Annie looked at him. That answer gets old. It does. He handed her a printed sheet from the console. The address is a rooming house outside Youngstown, but he's using the name Carl Mason. Utility records match. So do partial employment records from a warehouse. Why change his name? Fear. Debt. Avoiding legal pressure. Maybe all three. Or Eleanor. Richard did not answer fast enough. Annie turned to the window. The trees along the highway blurred gray and black. For a while she watched them and tried to imagine Mara on Blackwater Road. Cold rain in her face. A 7-year-old Richard coughing into her blue scarf. Annie had spent her life thinking her mother's sadness came from ordinary disappointment. Work that did not pay enough. Men who did not stay. A body worn down too early. Now the sadness had a map, a road, a company logo, signatures, near the state line. Richard stopped at a gas station with a diner attached. Annie bought coffee, even though Richard offered. She paid with crumpled bills and made him watch her do it. You don't have to prove independence every time, he said when they got back in the car. She snapped the lid onto the cup. And you don't have to make every bill disappear before I decide whether I trust you. That's not what I meant. I know what you meant. I'm telling you how it lands. He accepted that. Again, after another hour, Richard said, I was angry at my father for years. Annie did not look over. For what? For being half gone, even when he was in the room. He would sit at dinner and stare at his hands. I thought he was thinking about business. Later, I thought he was thinking about guilt. I resented both. You were a kid. I'm not asking you to feel sorry for me. Good. He gave a small nod, almost a smile, but it faded. When I found the letter, I was angry again. Not because he owed your mother. Because he had known and still let years pass. Then I met you, and I realized anger can be comfortable when it stays pointed at the dead. It gets harder when the living are still paying. Annie let that sit. It was not an apology. It was not useful yet, but it was honest enough to keep. The address led them to a narrow street of small rental houses and boarded storefronts outside Youngstown. A freight line ran behind the block. The rooming house was yellow once, now weathered to a color like old paper. 3 mailboxes hung crooked near the front door. One had Mason written in black marker. Richard reached for his phone. Let me go first. No. Annie, he doesn't know you. He might know your name. That could make him shut the door before we get one word. And he knows you? He knows my mother's name. That's better. Richard looked like he wanted to argue. He did not. They walked up together, but Annie took the lead. A thin woman in a sweatshirt opened the front door before they knocked. She had a cigarette in one hand and a baby on her hip. You looking for Carl? Caleb Monroe, Annie said. The woman's eyes narrowed. Don't know him. Then Carl. He owe you? No. He owe him? She nodded toward Richard. No, Annie said. He owes the dead. The woman stared at her for a second, then stepped back. Top floor. Back room. Don't bang too hard. He's sick. The stairs smelled like damp carpet and fried onions. Annie climbed slowly, aware of Richard behind her and the folder under her arm. At the top, the hallway was narrow. A television murmured behind one door. Someone coughed behind another. Back room. Annie knocked. No answer. She knocked again. Mr. Monroe? Something moved inside. A chair leg scraped. Go away. The voice was thin and rough. Annie leaned closer to the door. My name is Annie Carter. Mara Carter was my mother. Silence. Then the lock turned, but the chain stayed on. The door opened 2 inches. One eye looked out, pale and wet with age. Say that again. Mara Carter was my mother. The eye shifted to Richard, and fear came so fast it was almost visible. No, the man said. No Hawthorns. He started to close the door. Annie put her hand against it. He's not why I'm here. Then why bring him? Because his family helped bury what happened to mine, and he owns a car that can make it to Ohio. The old man stared. Something like surprise moved through him. Richard said quietly, Mr. Monroe, I'm Thomas Hawthorne's son. I'm not here to threaten you. Caleb laughed, a dry, broken sound. They never start with threatening, Annie said. I read my mother's notebook. The laugh stopped. She wrote your name on a page someone tore out. If I disappear, ask about Caleb. Behind the chain, the man closed his eyes. Annie softened her voice, but not the truth. She died 3 months ago with people in our town still calling her a liar. If you know she wasn't, your silence is still hurting her. The chain shook. For a moment, Annie thought he would shut the door anyway. Then he whispered. She had blood on her sleeve. Annie went still. That night, Caleb said. Not hers. Harlan Briggs. She kept pressing on his arm and yelling at me to get him uphill. I froze. She didn't. The chain slid free. Caleb Monroe opened the door. He was thinner than Annie expected, with gray stubble, sunken cheeks, and an oxygen tube looped behind his ears. The room behind him was small. One bed, one chair, pill bottles on a crate, a hot plate, old newspapers stacked under the window, a life reduced to what could be carried or hidden. He looked at Annie like he was seeing two people at once. You got her eyes, he said. Annie had heard that before, but this time it did not comfort her. Then look at them and tell me the truth. Caleb stepped aside. They entered. Richard stayed near the door until Caleb pointed at him with a shaking finger. You sit where I can see your hands. Richard sat. Annie remained standing. Caleb lowered himself into the chair, breathing hard from the effort. He looked at the folder under Annie's arm. What do you already know? That Blackwater Road wasn't just weather. The truck was overloaded. The manifest changed. My mother saw it. You saw it too. Caleb's face folded inward. Yes, he said. The word was small. It still filled the room. Annie held the back of the chair to steady herself. Tell me the part they tore out. Caleb looked toward the window where the tracks ran behind the house. For a long moment, only the oxygen machine hummed. Then he said, Your mother saved more than the Hawthorne boy. That's what they hated most. If she'd only saved Thomas and Richard, they could have bought flowers and called her brave in private. But she saw the paperwork. She saw the second manifest. And she saw who ordered that truck out. Richard leaned forward. Who? Caleb looked at him with old contempt. Your aunt. The room went cold. Eleanor signed the rush order, Caleb said. Storm coming, deadline closing, penalties if the shipment missed the transfer. Driver said brakes were soft. I heard him. I was there when he called it in. They told him to roll. Richard's face had gone ashen. Annie asked. And after? After, your mother wouldn't change her story. Not at first. She kept saying people had a right to know what was in the air. Then they brought lawyers. Said if the company fell, workers would lose pensions. Said families would suffer. Said she'd be blamed for panic. Then they offered her school money, protection, a job later. Thomas was in the room for some of it. He looked sick, but he let them talk. Annie's voice was barely there. Why did she sign? Caleb looked at her. Because they told her if she didn't, they'd say she stole drugs from Street Agnes. Annie felt the floor leave her and come back wrong. No, they had a report drafted. False, but official enough. Said she had access. Said she was unstable after the incident. Said she made claims to cover herself. Richard whispered, Jesus. Caleb snapped, don't bring him in late. Annie's hand went to Mara's badge inside her backpack. My mother signed to keep from being called a criminal. She signed to keep you fed, Caleb said. She was pregnant, or close to knowing. I don't know which. But she told me she couldn't fight men who could make a child hungry before it was born. Annie turned away because if she looked at either man, she might break something. Caleb coughed hard into a handkerchief. When it passed, he reached under the mattress and pulled out a small metal box. I kept what I could, he said. Coward's collection. Inside were 2 cassette tapes, a folded copy of a manifest, and a Polaroid of the overturned truck. Caleb picked up one tape. Thomas came to me years later, wanted me to sign a statement, said he was putting things right. I didn't trust him, so I recorded him. Then Eleanor's people found out. I ran again. He handed the tape to Annie, not Richard. Why keep it all this time? She asked. Caleb's eyes filled, but the tears did not fall. Because your mother stood in poison while I stood in fear. Keeping proof was the smallest brave thing I could manage, and I still managed it too late. Annie looked at the tape in her hand. It felt heavier than any envelope. What's on it? Caleb looked at Richard, then back at Annie. Thomas Hawthorne saying the promise out loud. Your mother's name, your name, if she ever had a daughter, the school fund, the medical help, the admission that Eleanor buried it. Richard closed his eyes. Annie did not. She had spent too much of her life with other people asking her to look away. Will you say this publicly? She asked. Caleb flinched. There it was, the old fear, still alive. Annie could have been angry. She was, but beneath it she saw the oxygen tube, the shaking hands, the room that looked like punishment stretched over years. My mother is dead, she said. You're alive. That means you can still choose what your silence means. Caleb stared at the metal box. I don't know if I have the strength. Annie leaned down until he had to meet her eyes. Then borrow hers. The old man covered his face with one hand. Richard stood slowly. Mr. Monroe, if Eleanor comes after you, she comes through me first. Caleb lowered his hand. That's supposed to comfort me? No, Richard said. It's supposed to be on record. For the first time, Caleb looked at him with something other than fear. Annie put the tape and manifest copy into her backpack. We'll need you soon. Caleb nodded, though it looked like the nod cost him. At the door, he called her name. Annie turned. Your mother, he said, voice breaking. She wasn't quiet because she was weak. She was quiet because they put a knife to every future she loved. Annie held his gaze. Then we take the knife back, she said. Outside, the wind had picked up along the tracks. Richard did not speak until they reached the car. Annie was glad for that. Some truths needed a walk before language. When they pulled away from the rooming house, Annie looked back once. Caleb stood at the upstairs window, small behind the glass, one hand lifted but not quite waving. The road home stretched gray ahead of them. In her backpack, Mara's notebook, Thomas's letter, and Caleb's tape lay together for the first time. The dead had finally found a witness who could still breathe. They had driven nearly 20 miles before Richard said anything. I knew Eleanor was involved, he said, both hands on the wheel. I knew she hid the letter. I knew she pressured the attorneys. But signing the rush order after a brake complaint. He stopped there. Annie watched the gray highway unspool ahead of them. She had the tape in her backpack, but she kept one hand on the zipper like it might vanish if she trusted the world too much. You sound surprised. I am. That must be nice. Richard glanced at her. To still have room for surprise, she said. Some of us ran out early. He took the words without arguing. The car moved past bare fields, old barns, gas stations with flags snapping hard in the wind. Annie looked at every passing truck and wondered how many lives had been decided by someone at a desk saying the weather could wait, the brakes could wait, the workers could wait, the woman on the road could wait. Mara had waited. That was the part Annie could not get around. Her mother had waited for Thomas Hawthorne to become brave, waited for a promise, waited for someone with power to decide that truth mattered more than comfort. Then she had waited so long that waiting became work, became poverty, became a bad file, became a tired heart. Richard pulled into a rest stop halfway back to Ashford. We should copy the tape before we go farther. Annie looked at him. Here, my car has a digital recorder in the trunk. My father kept old equipment. I brought it in case Caleb had something like this. You planned for proof. I hoped for it. That's different. Yes. He parked away from the other cars. The sky had dropped lower, and the air smelled like wet leaves and diesel. Annie stood beside him while he opened the trunk and took out a small recorder, cables, and a battery pack from a padded case. It looked absurdly neat, like even emergency had been organized by money. Who else knows we have this? Annie asked. No one. Keep it that way. I intend to. That's what your father probably said. Richard paused with the cable in his hand. Annie did not apologize. He set the recorder on the trunk liner and inserted Caleb's tape into a small player. You should hear it before anyone else does. I heard enough in that room. No, he said quietly. You heard what Caleb said was on it. That is not the same as knowing. She hated that he was right. They sat in the car with the engine off while Richard pressed play. At first, there was static, then the sound of a man breathing too close to the microphone. Caleb's younger voice came through, nervous and low. State your name, then Thomas Hawthorne, older but not yet frail. Thomas Everett Hawthorne. Date? The 14th of March 2016. Annie felt the year settle in her. She had been 10 then. Noah had been a toddler. Mara had already been working nights at Cole's Diner and mornings cleaning offices. By 2016, the promise had already been late enough to rot. Caleb's voice shook. Tell me why you came. Thomas answered slowly, like every word cost him but not as much as silence had. I came because Mara Carter saved my son, saved me, and saved men my company endangered. I came because my family buried her name under a statement we coerced her to sign. I came because the fund I established for her future and for any child of hers was diverted, delayed, and hidden by people who believed she would stay too poor to fight and too proud to beg. Annie looked straight ahead through the windshield. A family in a minivan pulled into the next row. A little girl jumped out holding a stuffed rabbit by one ear. Ordinary life again, passing within feet of a dead man telling the truth. The tape continued. Eleanor argued that compensation would imply liability. She argued that public recognition would invite investigation. She argued that Mara was unstable, ambitious, and potentially dangerous to the company. I signed off on delays. I told myself I was preserving jobs. In truth, I was preserving my name. Caleb's voice cut in. Did Mara lie in her statement? No. Did she see the second manifest? Yes. Did she warn you the tanker was overloaded? Yes. Did Eleanor know the brake complaint had been filed before the truck rolled? A long silence. Then Thomas said, yes. Annie closed her eyes. Richard made a sound beside her, not quite a breath. His face had gone stiff, but his eyes had changed. Whatever part of him had still been hoping for some softer version of Eleanor lost it there. Caleb asked, what did you promise Mara Carter? Thomas answered without hesitation. Tuition, nursing training, employment protection, medical coverage if exposure caused harm. A trust for any child she had or would have, because she refused personal money and said if we were truly sorry, we should make sure no child of hers ever had to choose between school and survival. Annie's hand went to her mouth. Her mother had not asked for a house, not jewelry, not a payoff. She had asked for a door for a child she had not yet met. The tape hissed. Caleb asked, did that trust exist? Yes. Where is it? Controlled through the Hawthorne Foundation under a restricted education account. Eleanor froze it, then reclassified it after Mara stopped pressing. Why did Mara stop pressing? Thomas's voice broke for the first time. Because we made pressing dangerous. The tape clicked. Then Caleb said, dangerous how? Thomas answered, we threatened her work record. We threatened legal action. We allowed rumors to spread. And when she became pregnant, she was told prolonged conflict could invite scrutiny into her fitness, her finances, her associations. No one said the child would be taken. We were too civilized for that. But we made sure she heard the possibility. Annie could not sit still anymore. She opened the car door and stepped into the cold. Richard stopped the tape. No, she said. Let it finish. Annie, let it finish. He did. Thomas's voice came through the open door. If this recording reaches Annie Carter, then I ask her forgiveness, though I have no right to expect it. I ask my son Richard to do what I did not. Find the account. Restore it. Say Mara's name publicly. Do not call it generosity. It is restitution. It is debt. And if Eleanor stands in the way, remember that family loyalty, without moral courage, is only another word for cowardice. The tape ended. For a while, neither of them moved. Annie stood with the wind pressing her coat against her legs. She thought of Mara holding newborn Annie, already knowing powerful people had whispered about fitness and finances and scrutiny. She thought of every time her mother kept the apartment too clean before a landlord visit, every time she made Annie change into a better shirt for school meetings, every time she said, don't give them a reason, baby. Annie had thought it meant pride. Now she heard fear underneath it. Richard got out of the car. Annie. She knew, Annie said. Yes, she knew they might use me against her before I was even born. Richard looked down. She asked for my future, Annie said, voice low. And then she gave up hers, trying to keep me safe from the people who owed it. Richard had no answer. Good. Some things did not deserve one. Annie turned to him. Where's the account? I don't know yet. Find out. I will. No, today. Eleanor controls foundation records. Then stop asking permission. His face tightened. That may mean going to the board. Go. It may mean making this public before we have everything lined up. She already made it public when she put my mother in the dirt with a lie. Richard looked back at the car, at the recorder, at the tape lying in the player like a small, ugly heart. You understand what happens if I accuse my sister openly? Yes, Annie said. People might stop thinking your family is decent. My family already lost that privilege. The sentence landed. He nodded once. They copied the tape 3 times. One file went onto Richard's encrypted drive. One went onto a small flash drive he handed to Annie. One he uploaded to a secure account while standing in the cold, because Annie insisted on watching. Then she put the original tape back in her backpack beside Mara's notebook. On the drive back, Richard made calls. His voice changed when he spoke to attorneys and board members. It grew harder, cleaner, not louder, but stripped of apology. "This is Richard Hawthorne. I need an emergency review of the restricted education accounts under the foundation between 2005 and 2016. A pause. No, not next week. Today. Another pause. Because my father's private records indicate misclassification of a beneficiary trust tied to Mara Carter." Annie watched his face as the person on the other end spoke. Then Richard said, "If Eleanor wants to know why I'm asking, tell her I already know why she doesn't want me to." He ended the call. Annie said, "That sounded expensive." "It was free. Nothing in your world is free." He looked over. "No. It gets billed later." For the first time all day, Annie almost smiled. The moment did not last. Her phone buzzed. Derek Cole. She let it ring until it stopped. Then it buzzed again. She answered. "What?" Derek's voice was tight. "Annie, I've got local news calling the diner asking if you work here." "Why?" "You tell me." Richard glanced at her. Derek went on. "There's a statement online from the Hawthorne Foundation. Says they are aware of false and opportunistic claims being circulated regarding a decades-old industrial incident. They don't name you, but everybody knows." Annie's grip tightened around the phone. "Am I still on the schedule?" she asked. "That's complicated." "No, it's not. Annie, I can't have this circus in my dining room. Your dining room was fine when my mother was the joke. That's not fair. Late justice still matters, Mr. Cole. But don't mistake my patience for fairness." She hung up. Richard's phone started ringing almost immediately. He looked at the screen. "Eleanor." Annie stared at the road ahead. "Answer it." He put it on speaker. Eleanor's voice came through, smooth but edged. "Richard, whatever you think you have, I suggest you come home before you embarrass yourself." Richard said, "I have the tape." Silence. For the first time since Annie had known her name, Eleanor Hawthorne had no immediate reply. Then, softly, Eleanor said, "You have no idea what you're opening." Annie leaned toward the phone. "No," she said, "but my mother did." Another silence. Eleanor asked, "Is that girl with you?" Annie answered before Richard could. "That girl has a name." Eleanor hung up. Richard took the phone off speaker. His hand was steady, but his face was not. Annie looked out at the highway signs for Ashford. "She's scared," Annie said. "Yes." "Good." Richard did not correct her. When they reached Maple Row, the first news van was already parked across the street. Not a big network van. Just a local station with peeling decals. But it was enough. Mrs. Alvarez stood on the stairs with her arms folded like a small general guarding a bridge. Noah was behind her, peering through the railing. Annie got out slowly. A young reporter stepped forward. "Miss Carter, do you have a comment on the Hawthorne Foundation statement?" Richard moved as if to block her. Annie touched his arm once, not gently, not gratefully. Just enough to stop him. She looked at the camera, then at the apartment window, then at the backpack holding the voices of the dead. "Not yet," she said. "But when I do, I'll use my mother's name." Then she walked past them, up the stairs, and into the building where Noah was waiting. Behind her, the town kept watching. This time, Annie intended to make sure they heard. By sundown, Annie understood what Eleanor had meant by opening something. It began with the news van across the street, then another car behind it, then two strangers standing near the mailboxes pretending to read their phones while watching every person who entered Maple Row. Mrs. Alvarez chased one of them off with a broom in language sharp enough that Noah asked for a translation. Annie told him he was too young. Mrs. Alvarez said nobody was too young to learn how to defend a doorstep. Inside the apartment, Noah sat at the kitchen table with his homework open and his eyes on the window. Annie had made grilled cheese with the last slices of bread and a can of tomato soup Mrs. Alvarez had brought over, but Noah only picked at his plate. "Are they here because of Mama?" he asked. Annie stood at the stove, stirring soup that did not need stirring. "They're here because people with cameras like trouble better than truth. But it is about Mama." "Yes." He looked down. "Do they think she lied?" "Some do." "Are you going to tell them she didn't?" "I am." "When?" Annie turned off the burner and leaned both hands on the counter. She wanted to say soon. She wanted to say when Richard had the account records, when Caleb was safe, when the tape had been copied enough times that no one could make it disappear, when Eleanor had run out of polished words, but Noah had heard too many maybes in his life. When I can do it in a way they can't twist before the sentence is finished, she said. Noah nodded, though his face said that was still too long. At 7:30, Derek Cole called. Annie almost let it go, but if she ignored every problem, the problems would simply leave messages. What? Derek exhaled into the phone. There was diner noise behind him, plates and low voices. Annie, I'm going to need you not to come in tomorrow. She looked at Noah and stepped into the hallway, closing the door halfway behind her. You're firing me? I didn't say that. You said don't come in. Until things settle. Things don't settle for people like me, Mr. Cole. They just stack. Look, I'm sorry. I've got reporters calling. Customers asking questions. Someone posted a review saying we employ a girl trying to shake down the Hawthorns. I can't have the business dragged into this. The business was fine when Marvin dragged my mother. That's different. Say why. He went quiet. Annie waited. She wanted him to say it. Just once. She wanted one of them to stop hiding behind soft words. Derek finally said, You know I don't mean it like that. That's what people say when they mean it exactly like that but want to keep liking themselves. Annie, I have bills too. So did my mother. I'll call you when it calms down. No, Annie said. You won't. She ended the call and stood in the hallway with the phone in her hand. The overhead light flickered. From 2B, a television laugh track spilled through the door. Life went on around ruin with no manners at all. When she stepped back inside, Noah looked up. You lost the diner? Annie put the phone on the counter. For now. That means yes. It means for now. He pushed his plate away. Because I got in trouble? No. Because of Mr. Hawthorne? Noah. Because of Mama? Annie crossed the room and crouched beside him. Because people are scared of the truth when it might cost them something. That is not your fault. It is not Mama's fault. And it is not mine. He tried to believe her. She could see him trying. A knock came at the door before he could answer. Annie stood. Mrs. Alvarez would have called out. Mrs. Laverne would have knocked once and opened if nobody moved fast enough. This knock was official. 3 measured. Annie looked through the peephole. 2 people stood outside. A woman in a navy coat with a county badge clipped to her pocket, and a man beside her holding a folder. Annie's stomach dropped so fast she reached for the doorframe. Miss Carter? The woman called. My name is Denise Hall. I'm with County Child and Family Services. We need to speak with you regarding Noah Carter. Noah heard his name. His chair scraped the floor. Annie opened the door only as far as the chain allowed. It's late. I understand. We received a concern regarding guardianship, medical neglect, and unstable housing. Medical neglect. The words were clean. That made them crueler. Annie's voice stayed level because panic would only help whoever had sent them. My brother saw a doctor yesterday. His prescription is filled. His school has his emergency plan. Whoever called you is lying. The man beside Denise glanced past Annie into the apartment. Noah stood near the table, pale, one hand near his inhaler. Denise's face softened slightly. We're not here to take anyone tonight. We need to verify his safety. Tonight, Annie repeated. The woman heard it. Miss Carter, may we come in? Annie wanted to say no. Every instinct said no. But she also knew refusal became a note in a file. Uncooperative, defensive, unstable. She took off the chain. Wipe your feet, she said. The man blinked. Denise did wipe hers. They stepped inside and looked around in the way officials did, trying not to look like they were counting poverty. The heater knocked. The couch blanket was folded. The dishes were washed. Noah's school papers were stacked near the lamp. Annie had cleaned after dinner because Mara's voice lived in her head. Don't give them a reason, baby. Denise spoke gently. Noah, how are you feeling? Noah looked at Annie first. You can answer, Annie said. I'm okay. Do you have your medicine? He picked up the inhaler from the table. Yes, ma'am. The man wrote something down. Annie's eyes went to his pen. Who called? We can't disclose that. Was it Eleanor Hawthorne? Denise paused too long. The man said, We cannot disclose reporting parties. Annie laughed once, but it came out thin. Right. Denise looked at her with more understanding than the rules allowed. We need documents showing your current guardianship status. Our mother died 3 months ago. I filed at the courthouse. I have copies. May I see them? Annie went to the drawer where she kept the important papers, birth certificates, Mara's death certificate, temporary guardianship forms, Medicaid letters, school notices. Her hands were steady until she touched Mara's death certificate. Then they weren't. She laid the papers on the table. Denise reviewed them. The man watched Noah, who watched him back with a dignity that made Annie want to cry. "These appear in order for temporary care," Denise said. "Temporary," Annie said, "because courts take time and Death didn't ask if I was ready." Denise did not correct her. The man cleared his throat. "There are also concerns about housing instability. Any pending eviction?" Annie felt heat crawl up her neck. Noah looked down. "Yes," she said. "There is a notice. I am behind. I was working 2 jobs until about 10 minutes ago, and I have arrangements in progress." What arrangements? Annie thought of Richard, his money, his apology, the thing she did not want to use as a shield and now maybe had to. Before she could answer, another knock hit the door. This one was heavier. Annie closed her eyes. Mrs. Laverne's voice came through the door. "Annie, open up before I decide this hallway needs more witnesses." Annie opened it. Mrs. Laverne entered with a folder under one arm and the look of a woman who had not come to ask permission from anyone under 70. Richard stood behind her, rein on his coat, phone in hand. Annie stared at him. "I called him," Mrs. Laverne said. "Don't glare at me. You can fuss when the child is safe." Richard did not step in until Annie moved aside. He looked at Denise, then at the man. "I'm Richard Hawthorne. My attorney is on the phone and prepared to confirm that emergency housing support and medical assistance for Noah Carter are being arranged without condition." Annie's head snapped toward him. "Without condition?" Richard met her eyes. "Without condition." Denise looked from him to Annie. "Miss Carter, do you consent to him being involved?" Annie hated the question, hated that saying yes tasted like need, hated more that Noah was standing there with fear in his face. "Yes," she said. "For tonight." Richard nodded as if that mattered to him. Maybe it did. Mrs. Laverne placed her own folder on the table. "And I am Laverne Ellis. I've known these children all their lives. I was Mara Carter's friend for 30 years. If anybody writes the word neglect about this girl, they better write exhausted, grieving, underpaid, and doing the work of 3 adults right beside it." The man stopped writing. Mrs. Laverne leaned toward him. "Did I speak too fast?" "No, ma'am." "Good." Denise reviewed Richard's confirmation email, the guardianship papers, Noah's prescription bag, the discharge instructions from Street Agnes. The visit lasted 28 minutes. Annie felt every one of them as if they were fingers pressing bruises. At the door, Denise lowered her voice. "Miss Carter, I have to document the visit. But based on what I saw tonight, Noah is safe in your care. Keep your court dates. Keep his medical appointments. And keep copies of everything." Annie nodded. Denise hesitated. "People use systems for personal reasons sometimes. It doesn't mean the system can ignore the call." "I know," Annie said. "That's what makes it useful to them." Denise had no answer. She left with the man. The second the door closed, Noah started crying. Not loud, not like a child throwing himself into grief. He just stood there with tears sliding down his face, trying to keep his mouth still. Annie crossed the room and pulled him against her. "They're not taking you," she said into his hair. "You hear me? They're not taking you." "I thought—" "I know. I tried not to be scared. You don't have to try that with me." His small hands gripped the back of her shirt. Mrs. Laverne turned away and wiped her eyes with the heel of her hand. Richard stood near the door, looking like a man watching a fire he had not set but whose family owned the matches. When Noah calmed, Mrs. Laverne took him into the bedroom and told him she needed help judging whether her cornbread was better warm or cold. He went because he knew adults needed excuses too. Annie faced Richard. "Was it Eleanor? I can't prove it yet." "That wasn't my question." "Yes," he said. "I believe it was. She used him." His face hardened. "Yes. My brother." "Yes." The room seemed to narrow around that word. Annie walked to the kitchen table and picked up Mara's badge. She turned it over, thumb moving over the scratched words. "Someday, nurse." "I almost signed whatever she put in front of me," Annie said. "At the pharmacy." For half a second, when she talked about Noah, I almost understood why Mama signed. Richard said nothing. "That's how they did it, isn't it? Not one big threat. Just enough pressure in the right place until survival looked like consent." "Yes," Richard said. Annie looked up. "Then I'm done surviving quietly." Richard's phone buzzed. He glanced down, then showed her the screen. An email from a Hawthorne Foundation board member. Subject line: "Restricted education account. Mara Carter." Richard opened it. His expression changed. "What?" Annie asked. He read silently, then handed her the phone. The message was short. Records confirmed that a restricted education account had been established under Thomas Hawthorne's directive in 2007. for the benefit of Mara Carter, or her future child. In 2011, the account had been reclassified into a discretionary foundation reserve by authorization of Eleanor Hawthorne. Annie read it twice. Future child. She was the future child. The room went quiet, except for Noah's faint voice from the bedroom telling Mrs. Laverne warm cornbread was better because cold cornbread was just sad bread. Annie held the phone out to Richard. You have what you need now? Richard looked at the email, then at the bedroom door, then back at Annie. Yes. Then why do you look like that? Because if we release this, Eleanor will escalate. Annie laughed, and this time there was no fear in it. She sent child services to my door. What is escalation, Mr. Hawthorne? Taking the oxygen from the room? Richard's face darkened. Annie stepped closer. Your father said family loyalty without moral courage is cowardice. Which one are you choosing? He did not answer quickly. She respected that more than a fast promise. Then he said, moral courage. Good. Prove it. By 10 o'clock, Richard had called 2 attorneys, 1 board member, and a retired judge who had once advised the foundation, Mrs. Laverne stayed at the table with Annie, listening while Noah slept at last. The plan formed in pieces. A public statement was no longer enough. Eleanor controlled statements. She controlled donors, board language, quiet corrections. They needed a setting where documents could be entered, questions asked, cameras present, and Eleanor unable to turn the whole thing into gossip before proof arrived. Richard proposed an emergency board hearing with press access. Annie said that sounded like rich people talking to rich people. Mrs. Laverne said, then bring the courthouse into it. By midnight, they had settled on a county press hearing tied to a petition for review of the Hawthorne Foundation account. Richard's attorneys would file by morning. Caleb would be asked to testify. The tape would be authenticated. The account records would be submitted. Annie would speak if she chose. If I choose? Annie asked. Richard looked at her. It should be your choice. She thought of Noah crying silently. Mara signing a statement because they had made hunger and custody and criminal lies crowd around her unborn child. Eleanor in the Lincoln, saying privacy like it was dignity. I choose, Annie said. Mrs. Laverne nodded once, proud but sad. Then get some sleep. Annie looked at the papers spread across the table. I don't think I can. You don't have to sleep good. Just lie down and let your body know you haven't abandoned it. After Richard left, Annie checked the lock twice, then a third time. She stood in Noah's doorway until she heard the rhythm of his breathing settle. The apartment was still poor. The rent was still late. Her job was gone. The town was still talking. But on the kitchen table lay proof that Mara Carter had not imagined the door. It had existed. It had Annie's name on it before Annie knew how to walk, and Eleanor Hawthorne had locked it from the other side. By morning, Annie's body felt like it had slept with one eye open. She woke on the couch before the alarm, still in yesterday's shirt, one hand curled around Mara's badge. The apartment was quiet except for the refrigerator humming and Noah breathing through the cracked bedroom door. For a few seconds, she let herself lie still and pretend the day had not found her yet. Then her phone buzzed on the floor. Richard, filing is done. Hearing requested for tomorrow afternoon. Press access likely. I need to speak with you before Eleanor does. Annie read it twice. Tomorrow afternoon. That was how fast the world moved when rich people pushed paper. Her mother had waited years for one door to open. Richard made 3 calls and got a hearing in a day. Annie did not know whether to feel grateful or furious, so she chose neither and sat up. Noah came out rubbing his eyes, hair flattened on one side. Are they coming back? Child services? He nodded. Not today. You promise? Annie hated how many promises poverty made dangerous. I promise they don't have a reason to. That's not the same. No, she said. It's the honest version. He accepted that with a tired nod and climbed into the chair. Annie made toast from the heels of the bread and scrambled the eggs Mrs. Alvarez had brought. Noah watched her crack them into the pan. We're eating rich today, he said. Don't get used to it. I won't. My stomach might. She smiled, but it faded when she saw the bruise on his cheek. She reached out and touched the edge of it gently. Still hurt. Only when I remember why it's there. Annie set the spatula down. I'm sorry. You didn't call Mama a liar. No, but I put you close to the fight. He looked at her with the plain seriousness of a child who had run out of childish answers. I was already in it. I just didn't know the name. Before Annie could answer, Mrs. Laverne knocked once and came in carrying a garment bag over one arm and a covered dish in the other. I brought breakfast. We made eggs, Noah said. Then I brought better breakfast. Mrs. Laverne set the dish on the counter and gave Noah a look. You eat both. You look like a strong breeze could put you in another county. Noah lifted the lid. Biscuits? And sausage gravy. Don't tell my doctor. I won't if you don't tell Annie I ate too. I hear everything, Annie said. Mrs. Laverne turned to her. Good. Then hear this. You're not going to that hearing looking like you spent the night wrestling thunder. Annie glanced at the garment bag. What is that? Your mother's navy dress. The room changed. Annie stared at the bag. You had that? She left it with me after your high school graduation. Said she wanted it cleaned for when you needed to stand somewhere important. My graduation was important. She knew there'd be another kind. Annie did not move. Noah looked between the two women, sensing he should be quiet. Mrs. Laverne laid the garment bag across the couch and unzipped it. The dress was simple, dark navy, knee-length, with a small collar and careful seams. Not fancy, not new, but it had Mara in it somehow. Practical, dignified, ready to walk into a room that might not welcome her. Annie touched the sleeve. I can't wear this. Yes, you can. It was hers. That's why. Annie shook her head. If I wear it, everybody will look at me like I'm trying to make some kind of show. Mrs. Laverne's eyes narrowed. Child, they are already making a show of your life. You might as well choose the wardrobe. Noah grinned around a biscuit. Annie gave him a look. He lowered the biscuit but kept smiling. A knock came again, and this time Richard stood outside with a cardboard coffee tray in one hand and a folder in the other. He looked at Mrs. Laverne first, as if he understood she controlled the room by seniority. Good morning, Mrs. Ellis. That depends on what you brought. Coffee? It improved. He stepped inside only after Annie nodded. He placed the tray on the counter and gave Noah a small paper bag. Blueberry muffin, Richard said. No nuts. I checked. Noah eyed him. Is this charity? Richard looked at Annie, then back at Noah. It's breakfast. If you don't want it, I'll eat it. Noah took the bag. You probably never had gas station muffins. I've had worse. No, you haven't. Richard almost smiled. Probably not. The small exchange settled something in the room. Not enough to make trust, but enough to make breathing easier. Annie pointed to the folder. What now? Richard opened it on the table. The petition is filed. The hearing is tomorrow at 2 at the county courthouse annex. Officially, it's a review of misclassified restricted funds within the Hawthorne Foundation. Unofficially, every reporter within 50 miles will understand there's more. Eleanor? She released another statement this morning. Of course she did. He slid his phone across. Annie read the headline from a local site. Hawthorne Foundation denies allegations, warns against exploitation of family tragedy. She did not read the rest. Family tragedy. Whose family? Richard's mouth tightened. That's part of why we need tomorrow. Mrs. Laverne poured herself coffee. What happens before tomorrow? We move Annie and Noah somewhere safe. Annie looked up. No. Richard did not seem surprised. Hear me first. I heard enough, Mrs. Laverne said. Hear him anyway. Then argue better. Annie folded her arms. Richard spoke carefully. After last night's call to child services, Eleanor showed she's willing to pressure your home life. Reporters are outside. Your landlord has already received inquiries. My attorney believes another complaint could come before the hearing. My landlord? Richard hesitated. He sent a notice this morning. Immediate payment demand. 48 hours. Annie's face went hot. How do you know that before I do? Because he copied the foundation's legal office. I think someone encouraged him. Noah stopped chewing. Annie turned away from him. She could handle being humiliated in front of Richard. Not Noah. Richard continued, softer. I have arranged a temporary apartment near Mrs. Laverne's church. 2 bedrooms, nothing extravagant. It's leased through a housing nonprofit, not my personal account. You don't have to stay past the hearing. You don't have to sign anything beyond occupancy paperwork. No conditions. No conditions, Annie repeated. No silence agreement. No release. No settlement. No control. She looked at Mrs. Laverne. The old woman set down her cup. A roof is not a bribe when someone else helps steal the one you had. Annie's eyes stung. Everybody keeps making that sound simple. It is not simple. It is necessary. I can't just leave. You can come back for your things, Richard said. Security can. No security. Annie's voice snapped. I'm not living like some scandal being escorted. All right. No cameras. I'll handle the press. Noah stays in school. We can arrange transportation. I said he stays in school. Not becomes a Hawthorne project. Richard took that in. Understood. Noah slid off his chair. Do I get my airplane pictures? Annie turned. Baby, I'm asking because if we go somewhere I need them. The blue one with Mama too. The practical sadness in his voice settled the argument better than any adult could have. Annie looked around the apartment. The cracked window frame. The heater that knocked. The table with one short leg folded with cardboard underneath. The couch where she had slept since Mara died. The walls that had held them and failed them by turns. This was home. It was also a place Eleanor had found too easily. Annie lowered herself into a chair. I hate this. Mrs. Laverne came behind her and rested a hand on her shoulder. You can hate a thing and still use it to keep a child safe. Richard's voice was quiet. Annie, I can't undo what was done to your mother today, but I can stop pretending you should fight from a leaking apartment while my family uses the leak against you. She looked at him then, really looked. For once, he did not seem like a man offering rescue. He seemed like a man finally understanding the shape of the harm. If I go, Annie said, it does not mean I trust you. I know. It does not mean I owe you. I know. It does not mean this is kindness. Richard held her gaze. It's owed. Noah whispered, like the letter said. Annie closed her eyes for 1 second. When she opened them, she nodded. They packed in less than an hour because poor families often lived half-packed without meaning to. Important papers in one folder. Medicine in a plastic bag. 2 changes of clothes each. Noah's drawings. Mara's photo. The Street Agnes badge. The notebook. The tape. Mrs. Alvarez came over and cried without admitting she was crying. Then pressed a grocery sack into Annie's hands. Food for the road, she said. It's 12 minutes away. Then eat slow. Downstairs, reporters waited near the sidewalk. Richard went first, not to speak for Annie but to draw the cameras toward himself. Mrs. Laverne walked beside Noah, one hand on his shoulder, daring anyone to step too close. A reporter called out, Miss Carter, are you being relocated by the Hawthorne family? Annie stopped. Richard turned, but she raised a hand. She looked at the camera. My brother and I are being moved because someone made our home part of a fight my mother should have won years ago. Don't call that charity. Another reporter shouted, what should we call it? Annie held Mara's garment bag tighter. Evidence, she said. Then she walked to the car. The temporary apartment was clean, small, and warm. Noah stood in the doorway of the second bedroom, as if afraid touching anything would cost money. There was a bed with a blue blanket, a desk, and a window that locked properly. Can I put Mama's plane picture here? He asked. Anywhere you want. He taped it above the desk. The blue airplane with Mama on the wing looked different in the new room, less like grief, more like something still in flight. That evening, after Noah fell asleep, Annie tried on Mara's navy dress. It fit a little loose at the waist, tight at the shoulders. She stood before the bathroom mirror, staring at her mother's shape on her own body. Mrs. Laverne stood in the doorway. Well? Annie smoothed the skirt. I look like I'm borrowing courage. No, Mrs. Laverne said. You look like you inherited it. Annie touched the collar and thought of the courthouse, Eleanor, cameras, questions, and the old machinery of doubt waiting for her. Her fear had not left. It had simply stopped being in charge. On the kitchen table, Richard had left the hearing schedule. At the top were the words, Matter of Mara Carter, Restricted Education Account. For the first time, Annie saw her mother's name printed in a place where it could not be laughed away. Tomorrow, they would try anyway. Tomorrow, Annie would answer. The courthouse annex looked smaller than Annie expected. In her mind, a place that decided whether people could keep children, homes, names, and futures should have been built like a fortress. Instead, it was a low brick building beside the main courthouse, with a flag snapping in the wind and a row of winter bare shrubs along the walkway. The steps had salt stains. The glass doors were smudged from too many hands. That felt right, somehow. Most judgment did not arrive with thunder. It came under fluorescent lights, behind metal detectors, on printed schedules taped to a wall. Annie stood across the street in Mara's navy dress, her coat buttoned over it, Noah's hand tucked into Mrs. Laverne's. Richard waited beside her with a folder under one arm and his phone in the other. He wore a plain dark suit, no lapel pin, no family crest, no polished armor beyond what money had taught him to carry in his posture. Reporters had gathered near the entrance. A few local people stood behind them, pretending to be passing by. Noah looked up at Annie. Do you have to talk? Maybe. What if they ask mean questions? Then I answer the question they should have asked. Mrs. Laverne made a pleased sound. That's better than what I was going to say. What were you going to say? Noah asked. That they could all go sit on a tack. Annie almost smiled. She needed it. Richard stepped closer. Eleanor is already inside. Her statement this morning framed this as a financial misunderstanding. Of course it did. She'll try to make it about procedure, not Mara. Then we make it about Mara. He nodded. Yes. Annie looked at him. Don't say yes like that unless you're ready to lose something. Richard's eyes moved to the courthouse doors. I am. She wanted to believe him. She did not have the luxury yet. They crossed the street together, cameras lifted. A reporter called, Miss Carter, are you here to claim money from the Hawthorne Foundation? Annie kept walking. Another asked, Mr. Hawthorne, is your family divided over these allegations? Richard did not answer. Near the door, a younger reporter stepped too close. Miss Carter, do you believe your mother was silenced because she was black? Annie stopped then. Richard stopped with her. The reporter looked startled, as if he had not expected the question to land. Annie turned toward the microphone. I believe my mother told the truth in a town and a system that were willing to doubt a poor black woman if doubting her protected powerful people. You can decide what name fits that. The cameras held on her face. No one followed up. Inside, the hallway smelled of paper, old coffee, and wet coats. The hearing room was already crowded. Folding chairs lined the back wall. A county clerk moved quickly between tables. At the front sat 3 board representatives, a county review officer, and a court reporter. This was not a trial, Richard had explained. It was a public review tied to the foundation account and petition, but Annie knew better than to trust names. A room with microphones, lawyers, and people deciding whether a dead woman mattered was a trial in every way that counted. Eleanor Hawthorne sat at the right table in a pale gray suit, her hair pinned smooth, her face composed. 2 attorneys sat beside her. She did not look at Annie first. She looked at Richard, like he was the disappointment. Then her eyes moved to Annie's dress. Something flickered there. Recognition, maybe. Annie hoped so. Richard leaned toward her. You all right? No. Do you need a minute? No. Mrs. Laverne took the seat behind Annie, with Noah beside her. Back straight, she murmured. Annie sat. The review officer, a woman named Patricia M. Doyle, called the hearing to order. She was in her 60s, with silver hair cut short and reading glasses low on her nose. Her voice had the dry patience of someone who had heard every kind of evasion and charged none of them rent. This matter concerns a restricted education account established under directive of Thomas E. Hawthorne, later reclassified by the Hawthorne Foundation. We are here to determine whether that reclassification was proper, whether the named beneficiary or beneficiary class was unlawfully deprived, and whether additional inquiry is warranted into related documents. Eleanor's attorney stood first. He was polished, narrow-faced, and careful with his hands. Madam Review Officer, the Hawthorne Foundation maintains that any account in question was lawfully managed within its discretionary authority. What we have here is a tragic misunderstanding fueled by grief, old family papers, and unverified claims regarding an industrial incident nearly 2 decades old. Annie felt Mrs. Laverney shift behind her. The attorney continued, Miss Carter's circumstances are sympathetic. No one disputes that. But sympathy cannot rewrite corporate records, nor can emotion transform a charitable reserve into a personal entitlement. Richard stood before Annie could speak. This is not generosity, he said. This is debt. The room went quiet enough for Annie to hear the court reporter's keys stop for half a second, then begin again. Richard placed the first folder on the table. My father created the account. The original directive names Mara Carter and any future child of hers as intended beneficiaries. The account was later reclassified without notification, without consent, and against my father's written instruction. Eleanor's attorney rose. Mr. Hawthorne is not counsel of record. No, Richard said. I'm the son of the man whose signature your client buried under procedure. The review officer looked over her glasses. Mr. Hawthorne, you will have time to submit documents. Keep to the process. Yes, ma'am. Annie noticed the ma'am. Not polished, not false. His voice had changed. The attorney began again. But Richard's lawyer submitted the account records. Thomas's directive, the reclassification approval bearing Eleanor's signature, and the later internal memo calling the Carter matter sensitive due to reputational exposure. The words appeared on a screen at the front of the room. Reputational exposure. Annie stared at them until they blurred. That was what Mara had been to them. Not a woman, not a mother, not the person standing in poison and rain. Exposure. Eleanor finally spoke. Her voice was calm, but Annie could hear the strain under it. The foundation managed many accounts during that period. Reclassification was not uncommon. Thomas was ill, sentimental, and at times inconsistent in his private intentions. Richard turned toward her. He was not inconsistent when he recorded himself. Eleanor's face changed before she could stop it. The review officer looked up. "There is a recording?" Richard's lawyer stood. "Yes. A copy has been submitted for authentication. With the officer's permission, we request a relevant excerpt be played." Eleanor's attorney objected. The officer allowed the excerpt for preliminary review, not final evidentiary finding. Annie did not care what they called it. The tape was played. Thomas Hawthorne's voice filled the room. "Mara Carter saved my son. If my family lets her child grow up without a future, then every dollar we make after this is stolen." Noah's hand found the back of Annie's chair. The tape continued just long enough for the room to hear Thomas name the trust, the promise, and Eleanor's role in freezing it. When it stopped, there was no dramatic gasp. Real shame did not always make noise. Sometimes it made people look at their shoes. Eleanor's attorney rose. An elderly man's private guilt is not proof of legal obligation. Annie stood. Richard looked at her, but did not stop her. The review officer said, "Miss Carter, you are not required to speak at this time." "I know." Her voice sounded steadier than she felt. She walked to the microphone. It was too high. She lowered it herself. The small metal click echoed. "My mother's name was Mara Carter," she said. "Not a matter, not an exposure, not a misunderstanding. Mara Carter." Eleanor looked straight ahead. Annie went on. "She worked at Street Agnes. She wanted to be a nurse. She carried a badge in her pocket and scratched. Someday, nurses on the back of it because she still believed in a future before people in this room's world taught her what a promise was worth when nobody was watching. She pulled the badge from her pocket and held it up, not for drama, for proof of a person. She signed a statement because she was threatened. She stayed quiet because people made silence look like the only way to keep her child safe. I know that now because last night someone called Child and Family Services on my 9-year-old brother after I refused to disappear quietly." A murmur moved through the room. The review officer looked sharply toward Eleanor's table. Eleanor did not move. Annie's voice tightened, but did not break. "So don't talk to me about emotion like it's a dirty thing. Emotion is not why my mother lost her job. Emotion did not reclassify that account. Emotion did not hide a letter. Emotion did not teach this town to call a brave woman unreliable. People did that. People with names." A reporter in the back raised a hand, forgetting where he was. The officer ignored him. Eleanor finally turned her head. "Miss Carter, no one here wished harm on your family." Annie looked at her. "That must be comforting," Annie said. "To think harm needs wishing before it counts." Eleanor's mouth closed. Richard's lawyer then called Caleb Monroe by video link. His face appeared on the screen, pale under bad rooming house light. Oxygen tube visible. He raised his right hand and swore to tell the truth. His voice shook at first, but steadied when Annie stepped where he could see her. Caleb confirmed the second manifest. The break complaint, Mara's warning, Eleanor's rush order, the threats against Mara's work record. He did not decorate it. He did not ask to be forgiven. He just told the truth like a man laying stones on a grave. When Eleanor's attorney pressed him, Caleb leaned closer to his camera. "I was a coward," he said. "That does not make her a liar." No one spoke for a moment after that. Then the review officer called a recess. The room broke into whispers. Reporters moved fast. Eleanor's attorneys bent toward her, talking low. Richard stood beside Annie but left space between them. Noah came up and hugged Annie around the waist. "You said Mama's name," he whispered. Annie put one hand on his head. "Yes." "Did they hear?" She looked across the room at Eleanor Hawthorne, who for the first time did not look certain of the floor beneath her. "Yes," Annie said. "I think they did." The recess lasted 15 minutes on paper, and a lifetime in Annie's chest. People stood, stretched, whispered, checked phones, and pretended the room had not changed shape. Reporters gathered near the back wall, speaking into small microphones. A county clerk replaced a water pitcher at the front table. Eleanor Hawthorne remained seated. Her attorneys bent close on either side of her, their voices low and quick. She did not look at Annie now. That told Annie more than eye contact would have. Mrs. Laverne guided Noah back to his seat and gave him a peppermint from her purse. For your nerves, she said. I'm not nervous, Noah whispered. Then save it for mine. Annie stood near the side wall with Mara's badge in her palm. The tiny scratched words on the back had warmed from her skin. Someday, nurse. Richard came to her, but stopped a respectful distance away. You did well. I didn't come here to do well. I know. She looked toward Eleanor's table. What happens now? The review officer can issue a preliminary finding. She may refer the account issue for civil action. She can also recommend a broader investigation into the foundation. That sounds like a lot of ways to say not enough. It may be more than Eleanor expected today. Annie slipped the badge back into her pocket. My mother expected a future. Expectations don't impress me much. Richard accepted that without flinching. Before he could answer, Mrs. Laverne called Annie's name softly. The old woman had been searching through her large black purse, the one she carried to church, funerals, and any situation she believed might require tissues, hard candy, or written proof. Now she held a sealed envelope in both hands. Annie knew the handwriting before she understood what she was seeing. Her breath changed. Mrs. Laverne stood. I was going to give this to you at home. After. But some truths get stronger when they stop hiding in kitchens. Annie did not move. Noah looked up. Is that from Mama? Mrs. Laverne nodded once. Yes, baby. The room had not been called back to order yet, but people near them noticed. Silence spread in small rings. Annie took the envelope. Her name was written across the front. Annie, when you are old enough to hate me for silence. The words struck her harder than Thomas Hawthorne's letter had. This was not a rich man's confession. This was her mother's hand, her mother's fear. Her mother knowing her daughter might one day stand in a room like this and need answers that love alone could not give. Annie looked at Mrs. Laverne. You read it? No. She asked me not to unless you never came looking. The review officer returned to the front table. Her gavel tapped once. We are back on record. Annie was still holding the envelope. Richard saw it. You don't have to read that here. Annie looked at him, then at Eleanor, then at Noah. My mother had enough things read about her by other people. She walked back to the microphone. Patricia Doyle looked at her over her glasses. Miss Carter? Annie held up the envelope. This is from my mother. I just received it. I'm not entering it as legal evidence. Not yet. I'm reading it because everyone in this room has spent years living with versions of her written by somebody else. The officer considered that. Proceed briefly. Annie opened the envelope. The paper inside was ordinary notebook paper, folded twice. Mara had written in blue ink. The first line nearly stopped her. Annie, if you are reading this, then either I ran out of time or courage, and I am sorry for both. Annie swallowed. The microphone caught it. I wanted to tell you the truth 100 times. I wanted to tell you when you were 6 and asked why I did not work at the hospital anymore. I wanted to tell you when you were 12 and said nurses looked like angels in sneakers. I wanted to tell you the day your acceptance letter came, because I knew you had opened a door I once stood in front of. She paused. Noah's face had gone still, but I was afraid. That is the part I need you to know. Because people will dress my silence in all kinds of names. Pride, shame, guilt, weakness. Some of those may have lived in me, but fear paid the rent. Fear sat beside me when I signed that paper. Fear rode home with me after they said they could make me look unstable, criminal, unfit. Fear put one hand over my mouth and the other over my belly, and I told myself quiet was how I kept you safe. Annie's voice broke on the last word. She looked down until the letters steadied again. I did not know quiet could grow teeth. A sound moved through the room, not quite a gasp. Mrs. Laverne closed her eyes. Annie kept reading. Thomas Hawthorne promised me school. He promised me work. He promised me that if I ever had a child, that child would not have to fight the same locked doors. I believed him because that night on Blackwater Road, his little boy was coughing in my arms, and he looked at me like I was the only person in the world who knew how to keep him alive. I thought a father who had almost lost his son would understand a promise made to somebody else's child. Richard bowed his head. Maybe he did understand. Maybe he was weak. Maybe those are sometimes the same thing when money is in the room. Annie heard Mrs. Laverne murmur, "Tell it, Mara. I need you to know I did not give up nursing because I stopped wanting it. I gave it away piece by piece. First to lawyers, then to rent, then to diapers, then to your school shoes, then to Noah's medicine, A mother can make sacrifice sound holy because the alternative is admitting how angry she is that sacrifice was demanded in the first place. Annie had to stop. She pressed the page to the podium and breathed through the ache in her ribs. Noah was crying now. Mrs. Laverne had one arm around him, but his eyes stayed on Annie. She continued, "If one day the truth finds you after I am gone, do not let it make you hard. Let it make you free. Do not spend your life proving you deserved what they owed. You were born deserving. That is not arrogance. That is God's math." The room blurred. "And if you stand in front of the Hawthorns, do not beg. Do not perform pain so they can decide whether it is convincing. Stand straight. Say my name, then say yours. That will be enough, even if they refuse to call it so." Annie lowered the paper. For a moment, she could not speak. The silence did not feel empty. It felt full of Mara. Then Eleanor's attorney rose. "Madam Review Officer, while moving, this letter has not been authenticated and is not relevant to the financial classification." "Sit down," Patricia Doyle said. The attorney froze. The review officer removed her glasses. "I said sit down. I know what relevance sounds like." He sat. Annie looked at Eleanor. This time Eleanor looked back. There was no victory in her face now, only calculation under pressure. Annie folded the letter carefully, then leaned toward the microphone. "My mother was not a liar. She was not a beggar. She was not a footnote in your family history. She was the reason some of you had a history at all." The words moved through the room and stayed there. Richard stood. "My father owed Mara Carter his life," he said. "My family owed her honesty. We paid neither. Today I am asking this review to freeze all disputed foundation accounts connected to the Carter matter, refer Eleanor Hawthorne's reclassification for independent investigation, and recognize Annie Carter as the intended beneficiary of the original restricted education account." Eleanor stood so quickly her chair shifted back. "Richard, do not do this in public." He turned to her. "That was the point of hiding it, wasn't it? That anything public would cost us. This will damage the foundation." "No," he said. "You damaged it. The public part only ends the lie." Her face hardened. "You think one girl's story is worth destroying a family legacy?" Annie answered before Richard could. "One girl's story was enough for you to bury it." The review officer called for order, though the room had already gone quiet. Patricia Doyle read from her notes, then spoke with care. "Based on the documents submitted, the recording presented for preliminary review, and testimony from Mr. Say, Monroe, this office finds sufficient cause to freeze the disputed account and refer the matter for independent legal examination. The intended beneficiary claim of Annie Carter will be preserved pending full review. Further, this office recommends inquiry into possible witness coercion, improper reclassification of restricted funds, and related conduct by Foundation leadership." Eleanor's attorney began objecting. Patricia Doyle raised one hand. "You may file your objections in writing." The gavel tapped. It was not over. Annie knew that. Rich families did not fall in one afternoon. Foundations did not confess because a girl cried into a microphone. There would be motions, statements, lawyers, delays, but something had shifted beyond Eleanor's control. Mara Carter's name was on the record. No one could put it fully back underground. Reporters surged as the hearing adjourned. Richard's attorney tried to clear a path, but Annie did not move right away. She walked to Eleanor instead. The older woman stood by her table, pale with anger, her pearls still perfect. Annie stopped in front of her. "You knew she was pregnant." Eleanor's jaw tightened. "I knew she claimed many things." "You knew." Eleanor looked over Annie's shoulder, searching for cameras, allies, exits. Annie stepped slightly to block her view. "I don't need you to confess to me. My mother already told me enough about what fear sounds like." Eleanor's eyes returned to her. "You have no idea what it costs to protect institutions," Eleanor said. Annie nodded slowly. "And you had no idea what it costs when institutions protect themselves from people." For once, Eleanor had no polished answer. Noah came to Annie's side and slipped his hand into hers. He looked at Eleanor with the blunt judgment only children could carry. "My mama wasn't a liar," he said. Eleanor looked at him, and something passed through her face too fast to name. Not remorse. Not yet. Maybe the first discomfort of being seen by someone too young to be impressed. "No," Richard said from behind them. She wasn't. Outside the courthouse, cameras waited. This time, when Annie stepped into the cold afternoon, she did not shrink from them. Mrs. Laverne stood on one side, Noah on the other, Richard a step back where he belonged. A reporter asked, "Miss Carter, Do you feel justice was done today? Annie thought of Mara's letter in her pocket, the badge against her palm, Caleb coughing through his testimony, Noah crying without sound, and her mother giving away a dream piece by piece. No, she said. Justice doesn't become fair just because it arrives late. The reporter blinked. Then what was today? Annie looked into the camera. A beginning, she said. And this time, my mother's name comes with it. The first thing Annie learned after the hearing was that a public beginning did not make private life simple. The reporters stayed outside the courthouse until Richard's attorney threatened to move them off the steps. Local news ran Mara's photograph that evening, the one from Street, Agnes, beside a headline that used the words hidden account, industrial incident, and Hawthorne Foundation review. People in Ashford read it over dinner, in recliners, at the diner counter, in church group messages, and in break rooms where Mara's name had once been spoken like a stain. By the next morning, some of them had changed their tone. Not all. Annie did not expect all. A woman from the grocery store left a paper bag of canned goods outside the temporary apartment, with no note. A retired street Agnes nurse called Mrs. Laverne and admitted she remembered Mara, remembered the day Mara stopped coming in, remembered thinking something was wrong but saying nothing because she had 2 kids and needed her job. Derek Cole sent one text saying, "I'm sorry about everything." Annie read it, set the phone down, and did not answer. Marvin Pike did not text. He came in person 3 days later, standing outside the apartment building with his cap in his hands and his shoulders pulled high against the cold. Richard had arranged for a security officer to sit in an unmarked car near the curb, but Annie told him not to interfere unless Marvin got stupid. Marvin looked older without the diner counter in front of him. "I won't take much of your time," he said. "You already took more than you were owed." He nodded like he had practiced for that and still deserved it. "My sister found something. From my mama's things." He held out a photograph. Annie did not take it at first. Marvin swallowed and placed it on the porch railing. The picture was old, color faded, corners bent. In it, a younger Mara Carter stood near an ambulance, one arm around a woman wrapped in a blanket. The woman's face was turned sideways, but Annie recognized Marvin's narrow mouth in the shape of hers. "My mama," Marvin said. "She worked cleanup near Blackwater. I didn't know she was there that night. She never talked about it. My sister says she used to say a woman from Street. Agnes got her uphill before the fumes got bad." Annie looked at the photo. Mara again. Holding someone up. Always holding someone up. Marvin cleared his throat. "So I guess my mama lived because of yours." Annie's voice stayed even. "Looks that way. I didn't know." She looked at him then. "You didn't ask." His face tightened. But he did not defend himself. That was the closest thing to growth Annie expected from a man like Marvin Pike. "No," he said. "I didn't." He touched the brim of his cap. "I was wrong about her. Yes. And about you. Yes." He waited, maybe for forgiveness, maybe for release. Annie gave him neither. Not because she wanted to be cruel, but because she was tired of being asked to clean up other people's shame. "You can leave the picture," she said. "Noah should see who his mother helped." Marvin nodded. He put the cap back on and walked away with nothing in his hands. Annie watched him go and felt no triumph. Only space. Small, but real. The legal review moved slower after that, because lawyers had a talent for making truth walk through mud, but Richard kept his word. Eleanor was removed from active leadership of the Hawthorne Foundation pending investigation. The restricted account was frozen, then restored under court supervision. The first disbursement paid Annie's tuition deposit before the deadline passed. The second secured the temporary apartment through the year. Noah's medical care was covered through a trust Richard insisted be administered by an independent firm, not the Hawthorne Foundation. Annie read every document before signing anything, twice. Richard learned to wait. One afternoon, he came by with a folder and found her at the kitchen table, a pen in her hand, Mrs. Laverne beside her with reading glasses on. Richard stopped in the doorway. "Should I come back?" Mrs. Laverne looked over the glasses. "If that folder has foolishness in it, yes. It doesn't. Then sit." He sat. Annie turned a page. "This says education expenses include nursing supplies, transportation, childcare responsibilities, and emergency household support." "Yes." "Why?" "Because my father's original note said your mother asked that no child of hers have to choose between school and survival. I asked the attorneys to define survival properly." Mrs. Laverne made a sound of approval. "He's learning." Annie did not smile, but something in her chest loosened. And this is not controlled by Eleanor? No. Or you? No. Independent trustee. You can challenge any denial. Mrs. Ellis is listed as an advocate contact, if you want her. Mrs. Laverne sat straighter. I accept. I didn't ask yet, Annie said. You were going to. Richard placed a smaller box on the table. There is one more thing. Not a document. Annie's hand stilled. She had come to distrust that phrase. He opened the box. Inside was a hospital badge, old but carefully preserved. Mara Carter, patient care assistant. I thought I had the badge, Annie said. You have hers. This one was in my father's safe. I think she lost it that night, or gave it to him with the scarf. I don't know. Annie picked it up. The plastic was scratched. The clip rusted. On the back, in Mara's hand, carved faintly but clearly, were the same words. Someday, nurse. Richard's voice lowered. He kept it. Annie closed her fingers around the badge. She did not cry right away. Tears had become less obedient lately. They came when dishes were drying, when Noah laughed, when a grocery store song reminded her of Mara humming. He kept her dream, Annie said. Yes. And hid mine. Richard looked down. Yes. The honesty mattered. It did not fix, but it mattered. Annie placed the badge beside the first one. 2 small pieces of plastic. 2 witnesses. Spring arrived late in Ashford. Snow melted from the curbs in dirty piles. The closed mill still stood. Cole's diner still served coffee. People still talked. But a new sign went up outside the community center near Mrs. Laverne's church in April. Mara Carter Future Fund. Scholarship and training support for working students and caregivers. Annie stood across the street when the sign was installed, Noah beside her eating a peanut butter cracker. He tilted his head. Mama's name is big. Annie looked at the letters. Yes, it is. Bigger than Hawthorne. Richard, standing a few feet behind them, heard and said, as it should be. Noah considered that, then nodded like Richard had passed a test. The first scholarship ceremony took place 6 months later, in the Ashford High Auditorium. Not the grand hall Eleanor would have chosen. No marble, no chandeliers, no donor wall. Just folding chairs, a stage with scuffed wood, a flag in the corner, and a sound system that popped twice before working. Annie liked it better that way. Mara had lived in rooms like this, rooms that smelled faintly of floor wax and old paper, where working people came straight from shifts and children kicked the backs of chairs. Annie wore the navy dress again. It had been altered slightly by Mrs. Alvarez's cousin, who refused payment and said Mara had once brought soup to her mother after surgery. Noah wore a button-down shirt and kept touching the collar like it had personally offended him. Mrs. Laverne sat in the front row with a program folded in her lap and tissues ready. Richard sat 2 rows back, not on the stage. By Annie's request. He had not argued. 5 students received scholarships that evening. A single father training in HVAC. A woman in her 50s starting medical billing classes after losing factory work. 2 high school seniors. 1 home health aide entering nursing school. When Annie's turn came, she walked to the podium and adjusted the microphone herself. That small click still meant something to her. She looked out at the room. Some faces she knew. Some she did not. Marvin Pike stood at the back wall, holding his cap. Derek Cole sat near the aisle, eyes lowered. The retired street. Agnes Nurse was there too, crying before anyone had started. Annie unfolded one page, then changed her mind and set it aside. For years, she said, people called my mother poor like that was the whole story. Poor was never who she was. Poor was what happened when powerful people took what they owed and called it silence. The room held still. My mother wanted to be a nurse. She saved lives before anyone gave her the title. Then she spent the rest of her life making sure my brother and I stayed fed, warm, and as safe as she could make us. I used to think that meant she had given up her dream. Now I think she hid it where nobody could steal it completely. Her hand moved to the badge pinned inside her jacket, close to her heart. This fund is not charity. It is memory with its back straight. It is a door held open for people who have been told they should be grateful for standing in the hallway. And it carries my mother's name because Mara Carter was not a rumor, not a risk, not an exposure. She was a woman who stood in danger and chose people. Noah wiped his face with his sleeve. Mrs. Laverne handed him a tissue without looking away from Annie. Annie took a breath. And to every student receiving help tonight, you do not have to perform pain to deserve support. You do not have to be perfect to be worthy. You do not have to apologize for needing a future. Someone should have told my mother that. So I'm telling you." The applause began slowly, then rose. Annie did not look for Eleanor. Eleanor was not there. Her absence did not matter. For once, the room was not arranged around the person who had done harm. After the ceremony, people lined up to speak to Annie. Some thanked her. Some told stories about Mara. Some apologized badly. Annie accepted what she could and let the rest fall. Derek approached last. "I should have stood up for you," he said. "Yes. I should have stood up for Mara too. Yes. I don't know how to make that right." Annie looked at him for a long moment. "Start with the next girl behind your counter." He nodded. "I can do that." "You better." Later, when the auditorium emptied, Richard found Annie near the stage. Noah was helping Mrs. Laverne gather programs, pretending not to listen. Richard said, "You were right." "About what?" "Too many things to list comfortably." This time Annie did smile a little. He looked toward the banner with Mara's name. "My father used to say he owed a debt he could never pay." He was right. Richard nodded. "I know." Annie appreciated that he did not try to turn the evening into his redemption. "But," she said, "he started something. You finished part of it." "Part? Don't get comfortable, Mr. Hawthorne. There are a lot of locked doors." For the first time, his smile reached his eyes. "Then I suppose we keep working." Annie did not answer, but she did not disagree. That night, back at the apartment, Noah fell asleep on the couch in his button-down shirt, one hand resting on the program with Mara's name across the front. Annie loosened his collar and covered him with a blanket. On the coffee table lay one of Noah's drawings from earlier that week. He had drawn Annie in blue scrubs, a stethoscope around her neck, and Mara standing behind her with one hand on Annie's shoulder. Above them was a plane with Mama on the wing. At the bottom, in Noah's careful handwriting, he had written, "Mama's dream came home." Annie picked up the drawing and sat with it for a long time. Then she took Mara's 2 badges from her bag and placed them beside her nursing school packet on the table. Orientation was Monday. Her books had been ordered. Noah's medication was full. The rent was paid. None of it erased the years. None of it made late justice fair, but it was real. Annie looked at her mother's photograph, the one from Street Agnes, and for the first time since Mara died, she did not only see exhaustion in her face. She saw the woman on Blackwater Road, the woman in the letter, the woman who had been afraid and brave at the same time. Some people would say Annie Carter was lucky. Lucky that a billionaire found her. Lucky that a letter survived. Lucky that someone rich finally decided to do the right thing. But luck was the wrong word. Annie was not given a future. Her mother had paid for it years ago, with her name, her dream, and every exhausted breath she took, trying to keep her children alive. The world had not handed Annie mercy. It had returned a debt. And in the quiet of the warm apartment, with Noah breathing steady on the couch and Mara's name printed where no one could laugh it away, Annie finally let herself believe the door was open. Not all the way, but enough to walk through. The lesson of Annie Carter's story is that justice should never be mistaken for charity. When powerful people hide the truth, the cost is often paid by those with the least protection: mothers, children, workers, and families already struggling to survive. Mara Carter's sacrifice reminds us that quiet courage still matters, even when no one applauds it, and Annie's fight shows that a stolen future can still be reclaimed. Real kindness is not giving people what makes us feel generous. It is returning what was owed, speaking the truth, and making sure the next child does not have to suffer in silence. This video is a work of fiction created with the assistance of artificial intelligence. All characters, events, and situations are not real and do not represent any actual people or true stories. The content is intended for storytelling and emotional illustration only.